Everyone is welcome here, it's time to make new friends. Whisky Bar, fill your Glencairn. Share a dram with the spirit of Edmonton.
Sláinte. Good day, whiskey brothers, sisters, and friends, and welcome to the Whisky Book Club's second book of season 6 with Ralfy Mitchell, this gentleman right here. He's the author of this book right there.
That's the one.
See that? Do we get that in the scene?
I recognize it.
Well, we should. And Stories from a Whisky Bar, collected and told by Ralfy is the title. I should have said that. And as always, I'm honored to have you, the viewer, with us today as well. And really, where else could you be where you're going to delve so deeply into the subject of whiskey with the author than right here, right now. My name's Dolph. I'm the Spirit of Edmonton on social media platforms, founder of the Whisky Book Club, your host this morning for us, this evening or early evening for our friends in the British Isles. And for those of you that are new to the Whisky Book Club, I'll explain just a wee bit what we are. We're a home base. We're a safe place for whiskey geeks that love to share a dram and share a passion for reading books like this, mostly whiskey books, whiskey-related activities. So this book is the 29th book reviewed on the Whisky Book Club, Ralfy's second book of 3 so far. I'm hoping for a 4th one, maybe something else. Maybe delving into the subject that which we were just talking about, the industry not accepting other people with it. Anyways, we'll talk about that in a bit. Now, if you love whiskey and you've done some additional research on whiskey, you've come across this gem. So Ralfy's got 184,000 subscribers. He's up to 148 reviews, 149 extras. It's staggering how much he's done over the years, and consistently every week he's done it. He's the co-founder with Roy Aquavide of the O.S.W.A.s Online Scotch Whisky Awards. And October 20th was the vote end. And November 2nd is when the results are shared. But I'm going to ask you a bit about that later if we can. And he's here with us today. So welcome, Ralfy. And what do you have in your glass, kind sir?
Hello, Dolph. I've got something, a blast from the past.
Nice.
I don't keep many bottles here in the Bothy itself because it's not really a dry environment. But this is I'm getting towards the tail end of a 1960s quarter bottle of Red Label.
Okay.
Which I can assure you and all the viewers is very different from what you will find in the bottle today. Now, in fairness to Johnnie Walker as a brand, I did buy a bottle recently, and it is much improved on what it was a few years ago. However, I'll tell you a little story just to kick off this interview.
Let's do it.
Many years ago, I was a member of the Malt Maniacs. I was invited by one of the original founders, Johannes van de Heuvel, who I think who was looking for a few more independent-minded people to join the Malt Maniacs. And when I did, it was just a few months later that they were celebrating one of their anniversaries, and Diageo offered basically a weekend tour of the facilities, a number of distilleries, bottling plants. And I thought it was too good an opportunity to miss because as an individual, I tend to keep a very strong distance from the big corporate multinationals because they focus really on the passive consumer side of the whiskey scene rather than the proactive drinker, the drinker that's invested in the integrity of delivery and smell and taste. And we do notice, certainly in Diageo's range. Now, fair enough, it's a blend. That's for blends, fine chill filtration, and the use of a little bit of colouring, E150A in blends. I don't have a problem with that, but I do have a problem with that in single malts. But you can see, when I hold this close, it's really relatively light. Yep. And when you nose it, you really are getting proper active cask influence, particularly sherry cask, really old school stuff. So when we take our timeline back in this bottle, this is probably from the late 1960s, early 1970s. So that the casks used for maturing this would probably be decanted of the original produce, whether sherry or bourbon, back in the 1950s, in other words, post-war.
Okay.
Of course, there was a lot of really good stuff in warehouses in Spain, in the USA, which wasn't selling because, frankly, there was a war on. So just when you understand this timeline, you see these bottles, particularly when they've got damaged labels, there's no interest to the collector. And therefore, if the price is right, they're of particular interest to the drinker. But a word of advice I would give to anybody who's bidding at auction is always be careful about the neck fill. If you have a very low, what you call a shoulder fill, so if there's been a certain amount of losses over the years in sealed storage, so the screw top is perfectly intact, it hasn't been tampered with, but inevitably there has been some slight losses. But if that liquid in the bottle goes down too far, it means one thing: it's alcohol that's being lost.
Yeah.
Not the water side of it, because the alcohol is molecularly a lot lighter, and therefore the strength is diminishing. And as the strength diminishes, so does the flavor, until you end up with a phenomenon called Cabbage Gunge. Now, have you heard of this?
I have not.
It's
Say it again. Cabbage Gunge?
Gunge. Cabbage Gunge is where you very occasionally, you used to see them in the old days when people were indiscriminately buying any bottle so long as it was old. But every now and again, you'd see a bottle of whiskey, and it wasn't just cloudy. It was kind of thready and sort of looked a bit like a septic tank.
Okay.
Excuse me, by the way, incoming.
I love it.
This is Billy.
Hey, Billy.
He's here for one reason and one reason alone. Aren't you, sweetheart?
Snack time.
Snack time. This cat has incredible hearing, don't you, sweetheart? The Bothy is well away from the house, but he can hear every word. Now, are you gonna, and you won't jump back up? Promise? Promise? There you go. Cats don't promise anything. They never make promises. They do.
Well, they just don't. They lie. Cats lie.
Cats.
Dogs are a bit too simple to lie, in my opinion. I love dogs, but cats.
Yes.
Trust them. They're guided most of the time by their tummies, but not always.
Yeah.
Sometimes just something else.
Which is why the bribery and corruption works so well in cats.
Nice.
But that's what I have. The Cabbage Gunge. You occasionally see it in a bottle where it's lost its alcohol, and what is left has simply become bacterially contaminated, and it just looks horrible. And I know that some of the experts have sort of tried to analyze it and even taste it, but it's absolutely awful.
Okay.
Really awful.
And it's funny that you picked that one, because off air, we were talking about the Victoria Whiskey Festival. Last year, it might have been the year before, I reviewed that bottle. So I believe we called it a 1970s bottling. And so we compared it with the new one, and we had it blind, and we're trying to decide what we liked about both of them. And it was fairly easy picking one over the other. However, it was with I'll do this. Sons of Vancouver. So they're in North Vancouver, and they're fantastic. And I was online with them for, I think it was probably just 10 minutes, and it was fun and very enjoyable. So I'm glad you have that with you. And it's nice to delve into the past a little bit. Just for me, especially in comparison when I have two of them side by side. Your memory is probably better than me, and you don't really need the other one side by side. I need it for reference points. Yeah, I definitely need it. But
it certainly gives you a more articulate reference, and also having access to older bottlings from decades ago. It's such a fascinating experience. Particularly for an experienced whiskey drinker like yourself, and probably the viewers who are going to be tuning in, you really start to get the historical perspective. You get an explanation, really, as to why modern whiskies are the way they are. And you have this increasing clear separation about the sweeter, simpler,
Yes.
passive consumer, brand-driven labels, and the increasing craft. Exactly what happened with wine, exactly what's happened with beer, but you have the emergence now, and it's delightful to see it in Canada with Shelter Point and Macaloni's. You have the appearance of this smaller, craft-orientated distillery scene who are producing whiskey for people who have phenomenally educated and self-taught palates.
And you just talk about Macaloni's, and that's what I have in my glass tonight. So, however, this is a blend. This was prior to them. So it's a blended malt, but it's not their blended malt. It's a blended malt from Tianek. I can't see it. I have horrible. Acrius, Tiaminec, Kleinlich, and there's one more. Blair
Yes.
Alf. That's their
Othrusk.
Othrusk. Thank you.
Othrusk, that's it. Occasionally pronounced Othroisk, which is fine.
I'm always learning. So French and English, I'm bilingual that way, but I need some help sometime. And we'll be in Scotland this summer, and I do believe I will need some counseling from some people. I'll be calling them up. How do I say this? Or what does this person mean when they say this to me? It might be nice, it might not. We'll see. Well, let's delve into this, and I'm going to say welcome again. It's been 6 months since we've spoken on the air like this, and I'm wondering how you're doing. Because I see you online all the time, but we don't get delving into it. How are you doing? How's life progressing for you, sir?
Well, I've got absolutely no grumbles when I see, the things that other people have to, put up with around me globally. Because we're in a global village now, absolutely. And we're all globally affected, absolutely. And this is the wonders of technology, for good and for bad. We have to adjust, adapt, and evolve ourselves. But I've had quite a grumpy year, actually, because I do notice that the Scotch whisky industry is wantonly increasing its prices, particularly for older whisky.
Yes.
And I think that it's rather like a stretched elastic band. The more you stretch it, the harder it snaps when you let it go.
Yeah.
And already and it's not just my opinion, Dolph, there's an opinion of many experienced onliners, that there is actually a year of reckoning around the corner. And I think it's going to start next year. This year has been a quiet year for whisky sales. And yet we are seeing, I'll give you a working example. We'll give you a distillery in Speyside who have just released a 17-year-old single malt, cask strength, fair play, in a Mizunara cask finish, which you've got to be careful with Mizunara. It can completely overwhelm a whiskey. It's just a fashionable name. It's like Chinkapin, right? Too much of anything is not particularly good in a whiskey, whatever the cask, Oakwood source. But they're asking £250 a bottle, which I think is probably about 480 Canadian dollars.
Okay.
17-year-old single malt. That's too much.
Well, Dalmore for an 18-year-old, a plain old 18-year-old, 43% Dalmore is over $500 for us.
Yes. So with any luck, they won't sell their product.
Yes, I agree.
I'll tell you why. I mean, we've got to give a little bit of tough love here. Dalmore can be a great whiskey. It can be, particularly from independent bottlers, where they tend to deliver it more naturally, and they don't chill filter it, and they don't dose it heavily with E150 colorant. But when you are premium point pricing your product, and also the fact that distilleries have been getting involved in non-fungible tokens and extreme age pricing, irrespective of the quality of whiskey. I see their game plan, get the money in, gather your harvest while the sun is shining. But I tell you what, people are really registering this now and saying, no, this is actually putting me off buying the extra 1 or 2 bottles of whiskey I was going to buy.
Mm-hmm.
I'm just going to tighten my purse strings now. And hopefully, in fact, it's not hopefully, it's a fact that good luck to these distilleries like Dalmore, like Macallan, like Ardbeg, another good example, who are putting massive price tags onto their brands.
Yep.
But there are plenty of other options out there which are frankly a lot more exciting and better delivered. And this is quite an interesting time for Scotch, with the arrival of a new generation of younger distilleries which are connecting more successfully with genuine whiskey drinkers, because they recognize them as their bread and butter, and they don't have this naive marketing schmaltz actually separating the brand from the active customer. And as a global recession wings its way in over the next few years, not just yet, I think we're looking 26, 27.
Okay.
You're really going to see people pull in their spending significantly. And we already see that. I don't know if you've heard of the millennials, right? The 19 to whatever year old.
No.
They've got a new word called sober curious. Have you heard of this?
No.
Sober curious is the proactive investment of avoiding alcohol at all costs, because it's not cool.
And imagine if that grows and grows and grows. And
it's been growing in Japan. The Japanese government actually had to have a public propaganda exercise to market for the alcohol industry in Japan, because so many young Japanese people in big cities were becoming alcohol averse.
And it happens. There's times where, well, it hasn't happened for us in Canada for probably 100 years, but really, there are cycles and we have to deal with it. And I hope those distilleries that you were talking about, the new ones, that are not gouging, that are there for us, I hope they stay alive, because the whiskey lock, the whiskey glut, it's happening. We see it. I'm spending less money on whiskey than I have in the last 20 years. Maybe 50. I'm spending less and less, and I'm thinking that we're going to get back to the older whiskeys being more available and interesting. But let's get back to the book. I love these conversations. They're always going to come into us, especially with you, because you have so much to say, and that's good. And you're allowed to say anything you want, get off topic, get on topic, whatever it is. But I want to talk about the book specifically. And you've already said this online. You've said how the first 2 books are intertwined. So they're similar, definitely linked, but 2 very different styles. So I'm going to throw a quote up here, because this is on the back of your book. So this is, there we go, a selection of 11 very different stories from the whiskey world about situations and colorful characters who we may already know, and we do see that, or have yet to meet on our whiskey journeys. Some stories are charming and heartwarming, whilst others are darker and more dangerous. And I didn't really believe it when I saw the back, but they are darker. So we have a little dark tinge in here, and I love that. So you've spoken of this online, but you can tell us more about how these 2 books are linked together and why you separated them.
Right. The first book, Search for Whisky Bothy, is primarily autobiographical.
Yep.
And it explains why we've got Grumpy Ralfy. Oh my, both copies. You've got one of the earlier editions.
I wanted the first edition. I can't get my hands on one of those. If you ever can, I want it. But
do you? Oh, it's the one with all the spelling mistakes.
I do.
I'm the lousy editor that I hired on Fiverr.com, she was a school teacher in Florida, and she made an absolute mess of the editing. She never did her job properly at all.
No.
But there's no way I'm going to get a publisher. I'm not quoted in that respect. But there again, I don't need a publisher because the internet technology allows me to self-publish.
Yep.
Now, the thing that, I take it for granted is that naturally I get a lawyer to read it in case there's anything libelous in it.
Yeah.
But essentially, I don't have an editor breathing down my neck looking to politically correct any of the comments I'm making, which is a huge amount of freedom. And I can publish what I want. And another thing is I can control, because I'm publishing it, the lettering size and the spacing between the lettering, so it's actually readable.
I'm really happy about that because I'm an old guy, and really, but this was very easy to read for me to go through. And comparing that to your first, and I don't want to belittle, but this was harder, obviously.
Yes.
And you learned from it, and you were able to adapt because of because you control it, which is very nice. So again,
another beauty.
There's a new.
Yeah, and the beauty is when you're self-published, it's print on demand. So unlike with a traditional publishing house, where there's an agreement and you sign a contract to the publication of, say, 5,000 or 10,000 copies of the book, which will then sit in pallets until they are sold.
Right.
With basically the modern format, as soon as someone orders a book, literally the press of nobody's even pressing buttons now. It's all in the algorithm. They literally, a machine somewhere around the world, whether in Italy, in Australia, in California, in Alberta, literally prints off that book automatically and spits it out at the other end. It's ready to go in 10 minutes.
Nice.
And this is fantastic because you don't have a stock of books waiting unsold. And it means I can go in, if necessary, and edit subsequently and re-upload the information literally within 24 hours.
Nice.
At this book, at this stage, I've kind of sussed it out now because you learn on your feet, as they say. Mm-hmm. So I've got a proper editor. She's an English lady that lives in France. And I've got a proper book cover designer, which is an English gentleman that lives in Spain. And my editor now at the moment is a local legal secretary. So she's very good at paying attention to the detail. So I'm delighted actually when I gave the ideas that I had to my book cover designer. Mm-hmm. When he came back with the book cover, it far surpassed my own expectations. I was absolutely delighted with it because with the earlier copies, as you can see, I actually got a professional photographer in to take a photograph of me in the Bothy so as I could basically just load the photograph. That's me.
I'm going to make myself a bit bigger so people can see this one. So there's the original one. Well, no, this is the second one. This is the first original that went out to the mass public.
That was the first one that was printed just around about pandemic lockdown, which got
the first one had 800 copies, I think, like prior to this one.
845 copies
So for the first book.
For the very first one, which had a brown cover. That's the second edition.
Yes.
And these are the third editions. These are the current editions.
And they follow the same theme. So if you look at your search for Whisky Bothy and how it changed, he was able to adapt this one as well to the same style as book number 3 and book number 2 that we're doing now. So beautiful styling. It is. It's very nice. And it's great. You tend to find people out there that are passionate about what they do and subsequently quite good at what they do as well. So I think that's nice. You're open to that. And you bring them in. But tell us again, how's this one different from that one?
This one, right? The first one,
but
they are quite different because the first one was strictly an autobiography narrating a timeline of how I got to the Bothy and have the attitudes that I do and review whiskey the way I do. And the fact that it's taken place over 30 years, from Glasgow's Whisky Club to whisky festivals, the appearance of whisky festivals, one of the first being the Whisky Fringe in Edinburgh, which is still a phenomenal event, and tickets sell out instantly for it. And then the second book, you see, started with 2 chapters originally from the first book that didn't fit because they were too different. So even as I was concluding the first book, I recognized there was a second book there which are non-autobiography. They don't fit in. I mean, there's one chapter did remain in the first book called The Philosopher's Picnic, which people have found quite abstract, but in fact is one of these really weird whiskey dreams that you get now and again, these surreal moments when you've had a lot to drink and you go to bed, and instead of having a very passive night's sleep, you have this outrageous, surreal, lucid dreamscape in which it was about me organizing a picnic for a bunch of Greek philosophers. So people, I kind of had a mixed reception, but by the second book, we're going in a different direction. Each chapter is an individual story. So in fact, it's a book of short stories. However, the short stories come together in the final chapter. We bring the characters together. All of the characters get involved in that final chapter. But we're starting off really with the story of the Hoochinoos, which has got a strong Canadian connection.
Tell us, please, because 2 things with that. One, why did you start with the Hoochinoos? Because usually the first chapter or a short story is going to give you kind of the feel, the makeup of the rest of the book. So I'm wondering why you started with that story as well. Is it the overall theme that friendship matters, or camaraderie is better than drinking alone, or there's nothing wrong with drinking responsibly? Because all those come up in the Hoochinoos. Yeah. So is it like that as a theme, or you just wanted to start it off because you felt like maybe it should have been the first book? And please tell me about the Canadian connection.
Yeah, a strong Canadian connection, actually. I mean, and this is with the Hoochinoos being the first chapter. It is one of the most whiskey influenced chapters because it's about a group of friends, odd company, who come together specifically round their experience of making their own spirit in a remote island in Scotland. And so I wanted the book to start off with a strong whiskey theme, because there are other chapters where the presence of the whiskey is a lot weaker. Yeah. For example, in the third chapter, Ella, we're really dealing with someone who murders her husband, who happens to be a retired cooper. Now, there's not a lot of whiskey going on in that, but it's still a whiskey story. But also, when you look at 5th chapter, Bobby happens to be a whiskey drinker, but that's the only thing that connects him to whiskey in the entire chapter. Right. And yet, in the pivotal part of that chapter, he rediscovers his freedom and his willpower, not sober, but non-sober, and put into a personal crisis situation. And it's the whiskey that actually helps him get over a massive obstacle and obstruction in his life. And by the way, it's all based on truth. I mean, this is obviously a fictional book, but it's based very heavily in facts that I've encountered over the years, either researching or talking to people in bars once they've had a few drinks. But we'll go back to the Hoochinoos, because it takes place in a Scottish island, in a small cottage. They've rigged up an old copper boiler, because copper's the best metal for distilling when a pot's still. And it's very easily adaptable and very easy to salvage out an old house that's being demolished, the old copper immersion heater. And they basically upend it, reduce its size, upend it onto the kitchen stove, and then they ferment what's been brewing out in buckets in the garage for about the last month. It brings people together who otherwise you'd wonder what on earth they have in common. But it's the whiskey, it's that event, and it's the ceremony around it that brings them together. And the Hoochinoos, that connection. I mean, everybody knows that one of the terms for alcohol is hooch, particularly when it's illegally made. But in fact, the Hoochinoos were, I don't know if they still exist now, an indigenous tribe of First Nation Canadians on the far west coast of Canada.
Okay.
Rightio.
All right.
Now,
so
when they were first contacted by European settlers, in other words, the beaver hunters and traders, the frontiers people who were looking for whatever resources were available, one of the challenges that these frontiers explorers had, the Europeans had, was they were getting scurvy. And they discovered that when they bought the beer from the Hoochinoos, who were really big in brewing, that in fact, for whatever reason, and they didn't understand it at the time, it was in fact a French Navy surgeon who identified that conifer bark, which was used to flavour the beers, was full of vitamin C.
Go figure.
Now, this is over 100 years before any of the navies latched onto it. And even when it was brought to the attention of the British Navy, who were looking for, to identify what is the cause of this wasting illness in our experienced, valuable sailors that we need to sail these ships. Even when it was brought to the attention, they just ignored it because it didn't come from a proper doctor. Right? But that's history. The Hoochinoos, they were introduced to distilling. And this is probably was the beginning of the end. Because they started distilling and trading their distillate. And it led to a lot of basically overconsumption problems.
Okay.
They weren't used to it. But I find this very, very interesting piece of history because people, when you hear the word hooch, you accept as it is. You don't really start to go exploring it and the meaning of it. And we find with exploration that many of these, it's rather like the Sith, for example, in Star Wars. Very few people realize that the Sith are, in fact, in medieval Norwegian folklore, they were dark forest pixies.
Okay.
Did you know that?
I love that.
Yeah. And this is where it all ties in. And when you look at, for example, Lord of the Rings and the orcs and Mordor and all the rest of it, so much of that has been literally lifted and appropriated from medieval European and Scandinavian folklore. Even down to locations. You can actually see the remains of these locations. Rivendell, the Shire, you'll find it in the west of England because that's where J.R.R. Tolkien travelled to. He, like many writers, and I find it myself, is it's much easier to be inspired when you're on location and you're getting the energy of a place.
From everything.
Now, sure, I can't just up sticks and go to Scotland, but what I can do is I can go into Google Maps. And
Google World and go down and look around.
Yeah, you literally can walk down streets, and certainly in this book and in my last book, Life, Death and Whiskey, I did a lot of that. I did a lot of street travel on Google Maps. Yeah, that's us.
That's you. Book number 3. Looking forward to it. And looking forward to book number 4. I'm going to keep bugging you about book number 4 as well.
Sure.
Because I think once you're a writer, I think you keep thinking of things to write afterwards. I think that's part of the subconscious once you get to that point.
Mm-hmm.
Thinking about this book, I was making connections, and maybe we don't have to talk about it now, maybe just later as this comes up, but I was making connections between the first two books. So you already mentioned Ella, and Ella was Sammy's wife. So when we read the first book, Sammy's wife.
Yes.
I was expecting to see you in this story with Ella, because you were in the story with Sammy, and you went to his house and into the shed, or I don't know if you called it a shed, but out back where they found him, the garage.
Yeah.
And I thought you were going to make a cameo in this one, so you didn't. And then there's Chuckles. So Benny and Barry's dive into the whiskey world. Could have been a continuation of Chapter 9, whiskey festivals and whiskey clubs, I thought.
Absolutely. Yeah.
And drama at, you're going to have to help me with this word, Garanan?
Girnahan.
Girnahan
is in Lewis, the Isle of Lewis, Outer Hebrides.
All right, where you had your life and death encounter, and that could have been a continuation of Chapter 6, cask culture and malt moments, because you were talking about your travels quite a bit there. So I didn't know if that at all. And Bobby, also like in your previous book, and he didn't want to be put into a nursing home. I don't want to give too much away because people can buy this, but a lot like Agnus did with her daughter in Chapter 8, Blogs and Vlogs, where she's trying to put her away and she revolted. It's like, I'm not doing it. Same as Bobby did. They stood their ground at a certain point, figured it out, and did what they wanted to do. Are there other links apart from those four that are obvious to you that I probably missed? Because I was thinking, especially when I got to the very last chapter where you're putting everything together, I was trying to bring back links, not just in the second book, Search for, but in this one with the second one.
Right. So
anything I'm missing?
Well, certainly in Chapter 6, Voyage of the Kelpie, that's a historical story from the 1950s. Early 1960s, from the tail end of when puffers were very prominent in the west coast of Scotland for transporting goods. And that included barrels of whiskey, definitely, from the islands down to Glasgow to go to the warehouses and the bottling plants. And also the year is 1824. I mean, we're going further back in time because I wanted to give a window onto the reality, the unsentimental, unsanitized reality of how harsh life was in the Highlands of Scotland at the end of the Napoleonic Wars. Because at that point, new tax regimes were being introduced as the City of London was consolidating its power, having basically been part of winning the war, major European war. And therefore, we're going back several hundred years. So I can't be there. But I do know that, I mean, I remember distinctly having a conversation with an academic who they had discovered the remains of an old illicit distilling site, but there was very little left of it, and they weren't sure whether to preserve it or just simply just quietly cover it over and just leave it be. And so they were asking me as a whiskey person, what did I think of it? And I said, well, I can't make that decision. I don't think there's an audience. People are not going to traipse into the hillside to see basically a reconstituted low-level hut, wooden hut with a turf roof, with enough room for a kid to crawl in and man a small pot still. There's just simply not enough substance to it. I think it's far more important to preserve some of these Victorian distilleries that have been closed down, that are far more imposing and are far more practical interest for people visiting to see the distilling of yesteryear. And to a certain extent, we saw that with the distillery Dallas Dew in Speyside, which for a while has been a museum, although it's now been bought over and looks like it's going to become a working distillery again.
Okay. You do mention, though, it, and I don't know if this was true or not, or because it's a fictional writing based on real life. In your very last chapter, someone was telling you when you went into the bar, the Bonnecourt, that there was at a museum. So at a nearby museum, there was they had found that distilling. I don't know what to call it. Distilling
paraphernalia. So they found the evidence, the small, like a stirring spoon, a pot, connecting pipes, line arms, a grate for a fire. They discovered these things because it was the case in the old days that people, if their life was under threat, they'd literally have to run for their lives from the powers that be, who were brutally suppressing distillation in the Highlands because, in fact, the spirit produced was a tradable, transferable, and valued currency, and therefore a rival to the British sovereign pound sterling currency. It gets mentioned in the last chapter. There was, as part of an exhibition at the Hunterian Gallery in Glasgow, there was some exhibits displayed. And I wanted to include that because it gave a direct reference back to the chapter number 8, the year is 1824, because obviously the characters involved, there's no way they can just walk into a pub in the 2000s. So it was really taking a little bit of every chapter into the bar, and even drama at Angernaghan. I was at the middle of that drama, and I walk into the Bonnecourt.
Okay, so that's the link with that chapter, because I had a question with that. I couldn't find a link from that chapter in that last one. I was looking back and forth, but I'll get to that question in a while as well. Let's go back to chapter 1. Yeah.
Hoochinoos. Yeah.
Music. So you refer to music a couple times. So that's one element in this story that stuck out for me. And I'm not sure why. It just bounced out, and you're speaking of music, and you did in the first book as well. You referred to music a couple times. And I'm wondering if you weave music into your various stories because it's purposeful, because it's the music is telling a story, or is it just how you remember things? Because in the past, you heard the music and it reminded you of this, or at the same time, these things were happening. So I'm wondering if the music is a device for remembering or something to move the story along, adding to the story.
The music animates the characters.
Okay.
Bear in mind, the two main protagonists in Hoochinoos are basically living a Rastafarian style of life. They're not Rastafarians, but they've got the dreadlocks.
Yeah.
And they love Bob Marley. They love reggae. And this isn't unusual in Northern Europe, in that when people are going through a very grey, wet, miserable winter, and they're listening to music, they want the music to come from somewhere that's sunny. And hence, when you go to Caribbean, one of the Caribbean, which is in the middle of winter, if you're thinking of a sunny beach and, you know, the waves lapping on the shore, that's where you go. It's not the Maldives, it's the Caribbean. And as such, the two main protagonists were big fans of reggae music. It set the mood. It set the tone as they consumed their clear liquor off the still. I mean, when you speak to people who have done this, there's a certain energy, a certain vitality in a spirit which is literally pouring drop by drop out of a humming, warm still.
Mm-hmm.
It's like eating biscuits in a biscuit factory. It's a whole. You can open a packet of biscuits from the supermarket, no problem.
Yep.
But when you're in a biscuit factory at the conveyor belt, and these beautiful, fresh baked, still warm biscuits are rolling out of the oven, that's a different experience, and it's exactly the same with liquor. They were producing What the Hoochinoos, they wouldn't be even producing whiskey, they'd be producing rum, because it's very easy you can't get sugar to ferment instantly, but it's very easy to pick up the bags of sugar from the supermarket over a few months without anybody really noticing. And as you can imagine, in small communities, tongues are wagging, ears are flapping, and noses are twitching. It's the nature of small communities. But I'm sure that everybody knew and everybody approved, because small communities can be sanctuaries for more eccentric people, particularly when they show that they're blending in and they show that they're supporting the community, which the characters did, because they helped out the farmers when they needed help, and they were dependable.
All right. I like it. And the music helps. It moves the story along. I was hoping for the memory of music, because that's kind of how I work. When I'm thinking of something in the past, music comes into the past and just kind of helps me along. Or you hear a song and the memories kind of flood back because of the song. So it's kind
Absolutely true, yeah.
So, one question I didn't ask you 6 months ago, but I want to make sure I do that this time, is talking to you about your writing process. Because when you first sat down prior to COVID, and you finally decided upon a format for all your books, the first and second, you decided that you weren't going to do a broom type of book. This was essentially, is this what you envisioned? So I know this morphed into a 2-book project, so first and second book, that it was going to be one, but is this what you imagined when it came out? And within that, what's your writing process look like? Do you write in the morning, evening? Do you do it with a dram, not a dram? How did that go in the decisions?
Yeah. Well, looking at conventional whiskey books, there's no way that I would even bother writing a Charlie MacLean book or a Dave Broom book, because frankly, they've already been written. Yeah. And they're very available. They're very informative reading, and they tend to be quite conventional and orthodox. They will give you more or less an interesting insight that reflects the official narrative of the whiskey industry itself. And that's all well and good. It's valuable. But in writing my own books, I wanted to give a perspective out with the whiskey industry, from the customer's point of view, and from the point of view of illustrating some of the lives of people who do the ordinary work relating to whiskey, whether it be coopering or whether it be housekeeping in a warehouse. Yeah. As we find in chapter 3, Glenclyde. I think it's chapter 3, is it? Maybe it's chapter 4. Just have a wee quick check. Chapter 4, yes, Dram at Glenclyde. That's really just knowing the people who look after casks in a warehouse. You know, the casks are not just sitting there ignored and, you know, gathering cobwebs. They've got to be moved as required, samples taken as required. They've got to be checked for their integrity, the hope that they're not leaking, because, you know, leaks are self-evident, just getting losses. And it's not unusual that in a warehouse you can come back to a rack of casks and discover maybe 1 or 2 casks completely empty because they've simply leaked away into the floor. This is why when you visit a warehouse, you don't really want to smell whiskey. But it's giving that, you don't hear, I mean, Dave Broom and Charlie MacLean, they don't really talk about the blue-collar workers and the job they do and the challenges they face.
No.
They don't. That's not part of the narrative. And therefore, it was an opportunity for me as a writer, being sympathetic to these people, because I drank with them in the bars down in Partick in Glasgow for many years. And I met these people at Glasgow's whisky clubs. And visiting distilleries, you always, in the open days, you'd always have the opportunity for a wee quiet word with the people who actually work there to kind of understand more as to their daily working schedule and their challenges.
And you've mentioned that online. I think that last week when you couldn't taste, you were talking about this online, and I think in the extras you mentioned that as well. Buy them a couple drams, buy them a couple beers, get to know them, get to know their story.
In the local pub, you know, they're sitting in the corner, probably with a gin and tonic if they've been working in the distillery all day. But hey, go over, say hello, ask if you can buy them a drink, sit down beside them, and see if they just like to just basically just share a few of the historical stories and the challenges they faced. I mean, obviously, I mean, in part of my archive, I interviewed Duncan, who worked for almost 40 years at Glenclyde Distillery.
Okay.
And he tells the story that when his wife, when he had young children, and the drying machine, the clothes dryer broke down, and she needed the nappies to change the children, and she was completely out of nappies. And he says, right, just bring, because it's just down the road in a tied cottage, just bring the washing round. We'll hang up a line between the stills, and they can dry off the heat of the stills.
Okay.
Which he did a few times until, of course, management, who'd been out in a grouse shooting or whatever, walked in and announced one late at night and saw that looked like a clothesline strung across between the two stills. And it's just, these are real stories, real historical stories, which you will not hear in a conventional whiskey book. And when I'm sitting down to write the book, I'm writing in the morning till about lunchtime.
Okay.
It's not unusual that I write the first halfway through the first chapter, and then I'll rip it up and start again.
Ooh.
I use the template of a specific size of book for consistency, which is a very handleable book where you can, it's the right size that you can read it without a magnifying glass being necessary, or reading glasses.
Yeah.
And also it's 12 chapters long, and there's 5,000 words per chapter.
Okay.
So that's really the template.
Right.
It will vary. Some chapters will be shorter. Some chapters will be maybe over 4,000, 4,400 words. Other chapters will be nearer 6,000 words. But that's the general template I use, because it just makes for a very readable size of book.
Got it.
When I'm writing, I basically have a very clear idea who the characters are, the context of them, and then I start to try and deliver their voice sympathetically, whether they are the antagonists or the protagonists. So, for example, in Bobby's situation, the chapter called Bobby, Bobby's a builder. He loves his whiskey. He's done well in life. He's built good quality houses, bungalows primarily, in the upper lowlands of Scotland for people's retirement homes. He's got himself a good reputation. He puts on a solid roof that's proper weather resistant, and he's never been out of work. He's provided well for his family. He hoped to have more time with his wife when he retired. It didn't happen, and as a result, he started to give his daughter more time. Now, like any father, he loves his daughter, but when the context changes, then the relationship changes. And the old saying that we love our family because blood is thicker than water. However, there's often we wish it wasn't. And family can be the worst enemies that you ever meet. Family can be the people that you're related to, that you make time for in your life when you shouldn't. They're only there by default of some genetic happenstance. And there's many people experience this. And it really wasn't until Bobby, and I mean, Bobby's daughter, she does care about him. She thinks she's doing what's best. But
that comes across,
yeah, but it's not until his granddaughter is no longer a girl, she's a young woman, and she starts to change, and Bobby notices that. He's unsettled by it, but he can't articulate it. He can't explain it till he's sitting alone in sheltered housing, about to be put into a nursing home.
Yep.
And he's saying, how am I going to get my whiskey from here? And it's the whiskey that sobers him up. He realizes he needs an escape plan, and he realizes that by not signing over the power of attorney to his daughter, he saved himself. Now, I met Bobby at Crinan on the west coast of Scotland.
Okay.
I was up there with my bicycle in the back of the car, because a very important thing about drinking whiskey is having plenty of physical exercise to burn off the surplus calories and keep yourself fresh and eat real food. Then you can enjoy your whiskey properly. And the thing about Crinan is it's a canal. So if you want to avoid the steep hills on the west coast, if you want a few miles of flat bits with beautiful countryside,
follow the canal. Okay.
Follow the canal.
Nice. Okay.
And you can follow the canal right up to Dalriada, which is just up the road, which is a phenomenally historic part of Scotland, which tends to get completely overlooked. And in fact, it's straight out of the Lord of the Rings when you actually see it physically.
Nice.
Very much so. It's that sort of very elemental landscape, particularly the hill fort of Dunad, which was the home of the kings of Dalriada. But anyway, I'm digressing slightly. But when you're up at Crinan, you're on your bicycle, you're going along, you stop because you've arrived at the main junction of the canal where it enters into the west coast. And there's an old guy standing there painting the door. And as you do, you just get chatting. And as old men do when they've been painting all day and they want a break, they get chatting even more. And this is when I met Bobby and discovered his story. Okay. And he was, in fact, I mean, there's a whiskey connection here because he was, in fact, a volunteer in the restoration of the last seaworthy Clyde puffer called the Vic 52.
Okay.
And another one of the volunteers was, in fact, the late manager of Bruichladdich Distillery called Duncan McGilvery, an absolute gentleman, an absolute gem. In fact, he's the man I credit with actually holding Bruichladdich Distillery together when it reopened. He's the man that really held things together for the team.
I haven't heard that story, so I want to hear that story, but we'll get to that at one point.
It's a story for another day.
Yes, okay. That's good.
But I really first met Duncan when I was a resident at the Bruichladdich Whisky Academy in 2004, when I spent a week there learning to make whiskey. And what I noticed was standing in front of stills, waiting patiently to turn a lever, you're not learning that much. It looks kind of glamorous, but the novelty soon wears off. You're far better spending your time in the warehouse, rolling casks and speaking to coopers.
Okay.
Because it's the wood, it's the casks that makes the whiskey every time.
And especially Bruichladdich, when they reopened, their wood program was essential to them coming back. Yeah.
Their wood program was whatever casks they could get.
Every different type of wine possible.
Exactly. So you ended up with the 1001 varieties of Bruichladdich situation, which, because it was the only distillery and it was the one that was, to their credit, and I commend Bruichladdich for this, they were the biggest and still are the biggest employer in Islay, and that matters. That was a distillery that actually put the wealth of whiskey meaningfully back into the local community in a way which Lagavulin, owned by Diageo, can't even possibly start to do, because it is a fully automated corporate thing. Just a thing. I mean, honestly, I say now and again, if only Lagavulin was taken over by Springbank Distillery, then we will see real Lagavulin.
Yes.
And not the pale, wraith-like stuff that unfortunately is passing for it at the moment.
Okay. How about Kalila? I'm guessing Kalila would be the same thing. I think that's fully automated as well. 3 or
Kalila is
4
fully
people working there?
But Kalila is different. It's
Oh.
the largest distillery on the island,
Yep.
producing the greatest volume of heavily peated whiskey. And as such, it is a very important stalwart in the independent bottling scene of actually delivering peated whiskey to people who buy from independent bottlers.
That's me.
So
Yeah.
credit to Diageo for not hoarding and coveting Kalila in the way that they do with Lagavulin, because bottlings of Lagavulin from independent bottlers are as rare as hen's teeth. Same with Talisker. And when you do see them, you have to be so careful about buying them because you've got no idea the quality of the cask. And the independent bottlers know that they don't have to worry about the cask because the name will sell the whiskey.
Yep. And I buy it. And they're one of the ones. There are certain distilleries where, as we love independent bottlers, I do. You hear the distillery, you just buy it. Let's get back to Bobby just for 1 second, because and I talked about the link to Agnus with her daughter Amber in Tales from a Whisky Bothy. Yes. And so this one, same thing as Bobby with his daughter, and you said it. She wants the best for him, but she's making decisions for him. And there seems to be a lot of information that kind of keeps coming back in relation to people who are retired or people going into homes. So you've got strong opinions, and how you took care of your mother as well kind of leads us to this. Mm-hmm. Have you known very many people that have had horrible experiences like this? Because it keeps coming up. I'm just going to say that.
Yeah.
Or is it just your time in the cooperative in Glasgow, that job, that maybe soured you a little bit to it?
I wouldn't say soured. Soured's the wrong word. But why?
Opened your eyes to it?
Opened my eyes to it, absolutely. See, as a funeral director, you're dealing with absolute reality. Mm-hmm. You're in and out of nursing homes constantly. There were times we'd walk into a nursing home, a private nursing home, and our feet would stick to the carpet because of the smell, because of the presence of urine, because of spills. You could. I'm not blaming the staff. They were understaffed. Mm-hmm. Elderly people are very easily sedated in nursing homes.
Yes.
You look at the cost of a nursing home. How much is a nursing home per week where you are in Canada? Before I tell you how much it is a week where I am here in Isle of Man.
Well, I do per month. And so I'm in charge of my mother. I'm the power of attorney for my mother. Yeah. She is in a nursing home. She has dementia. And so her nursing home's a little bit more, specific in her needs and what she has. So it's a little bit more expensive. And I think it's $92 a day. It's roughly $3,500 a month.
$3,500, right? Okay. Well, in the Isle of Man, it's £1,000 a week. We're talking almost $8,000 a month.
That's a lot. Oh. And for that amount of money, they should be getting quite the care.
Absolutely. There are many good care homes, but there are also ones that aren't good.
Yep.
It's real life. And I have
everything with every type of industry. And you've been talking about that recently, how people have been treating their staffs within different distilleries in the past, in the histories. Yes. There's good and bad. But you're having a hard time with a couple of these in this story. So I'm wondering if you're hearing more bad than good then.
I hear both. I hear bad and good. But when you look at Agnes's situation, it's actually very different from Bobby's. Because Agnus and her relationship with her daughter Amber is much more toxic than Bobby's relationship with his daughter, because Bobby's daughter is doing things for the best. She is a nurse. She knows that people do need to be cared for professionally depending on their needs. She doesn't want him to become an alcoholic, and she doesn't want him to be found face down with an empty bottle of whiskey in his own house.
Yep.
because that would reflect on her as a nurse. Now, this is why he manages to lie his way out of it the first time around, but he knows that the next time he won't be so lucky. The only thing that saved him was he never got round to signing the power of attorney over to his daughter, and she never got round to checking up on it.
Right.
And the lawyer never got round to informing either of them. Whereas with Amber, she just wants what her mother's got, and she wants her mother out the way. That happens a lot, by the way.
Okay. And I could believe that. I just haven't had that experience a lot because I don't have a lot of people in my life that have a lot of money that could be manipulated that way, I don't think.
Yeah.
Maybe.
But it doesn't even need to be a lot of money, by the way. It can be the possessions. It can be an opportunity for relatives to pay off debts, to afford some luxuries because they've never had the lottery win, to, particularly if the house involved, the selling of a house, that is a large capital sum. All the person has to do is just say, right, to their mother or father, transfer the house over to me and we'll look after it for you. You go into the nursing home and we'll pay you for it. And when they're in the nursing home, they say, sorry, we don't take any responsibility, anything to do with this person. They're not our problem anymore.
That's so sad.
It's real life.
Yeah.
I've seen this happen quite a number of times, by the way. But on the other flip side, there are families who have been very dutiful, who have supported an elderly relative when they do go into a care home variety, into a care home environment. Then they have been there, the regular visits, the vetting of the care homes before they go in. So as I mentioned earlier, Dolph, we're seeing both sides of this. But for Amber, she was a wee bitch. She was greedy.
Yes.
She wanted the money for herself. And Agnus quietly knew about it. You notice this, particularly old ladies. They're very good, conscious listeners.
Yep.
Even when they can give an opinion or interrupt, they carry on listening to see what more is going to be said. They're very good at that because it's part of their life skills. With Bobby, he trusted Amber. Yep. She was the apple of his eye. What was the alarm bells for him was in fact his granddaughter and her flights of fancy, and the fact that he realized it wouldn't be his daughter that manipulated him so much as his granddaughter manipulating her mother.
No.
You can read this into the what is not said within these chapters. I mean, the story of Agnus, who was a cleaner in the hospital, so we knew Agnus, and it was just so heartwarming when she literally did a bunk and went to Thailand. She upsticked and left. And her daughter knew nothing. And the whole neighborhood knew that the daughter had been completely outmaneuvered.
And you're cheering for her. It's like...
You're cheering for her. And furthermore, she was a smart, smart woman. She managed to keep in touch with her grandson. And she took him out to join him at the point where he was starting to get involved in drugs. So she probably saved his life.
Okay. You didn't mention that in the book about the drugs, I don't think. But you did mention her taking him under her wing at the end. So that was good. If memory serves. Still, it was 6 months ago. Let's go to another person. So we're going to, it was a little bit of a depressing subject, but let's go to another one that depressing, but it was fun. It was the darker part of it with Ella. And we already talked about, I thought you were going to make a cameo in the chapter with Ella. And I like this chapter because I had a place in my heart for Sani in the first book. I really did. And then you described him as being cantankerous, mean, ill-willed, aggressive individual. And so going back to what you said, not what I read, but what we said in our last interview, it didn't surprise me that she killed him. Okay, so I said it. So I gave something away for the book. I'm going to try not to give too many other things away. And how did this story come to you? Because I thought you were more involved in the story previously. And I'm wondering if you'd seen anything in your works previously, and maybe something like that comes up in this book once I read it. But there's something like that has come up in the past that you're linking to this story, or is this something that people thought or actually linked to this person? Is this complete fabrication, or other stories brought into this one?
The whole story is based on tangible, verifiable gossip.
Okay.
In a bar.
Which is what the book's about.
As mentioned in the first book, Sani got barred from the smithy. What I didn't mention is one of the reasons was because he threw an empty pint glass right across the bar towards another customer, narrowly missing their head, and it smashed to pieces on the wall behind because it was thrown with such force. Sani had a streak of violence in him, which was greatly accentuated by intoxication. Even before Sani arrived at the bar to drink beer, he already had a skinful of whiskey from his own personal cask. He would arrive drunk off the bus. In the earlier days, he managed it. As he was getting older, he wasn't managing it. It was starting to get more aggressive. He was making very aggressive threats and things to other patrons. He had to be barred.
Okay.
Now, if that's what he's doing in a public bar, what's he doing behind the privacy of his own doors at home? How's Ella? Is she getting battered? Because domestic violence is not unusual.
No.
But I don't mention
especially mixed in with alcohol and the lives that, yes.
Particularly. And we don't know the fact that Sani was in the war, that he was injured in the war. We don't know if he was suffering from post-traumatic stress disorder or ongoing trauma from that experience. But I don't mention that in the book.
No.
You see, when we're writing a book, we don't want to over-describe and over-illustrate. We leave certain things unsaid, which is why I don't put myself into the chapter about Ella, because it's Ella's story along with Patsy. It's their story. So I don't want to intrude in that. And yes, Ella probably had very good cause to do away with Sani. Now, you're not going to stab him in the back with the bread knife. You're not going
to jail. No.
You're not going to go to jail. You've got to be far more subtle about it. And this is, again, based on anecdotal situations that I came across as a funeral director.
Okay.
When in relationships, a family was reduced to a shambles by one member of the family continuously, aggressively, violently disrupting, interfering, and damaging people around them. And it gets to the stage that someone makes a decision. We've got to do something about this because we've got no recourse to the legal system. The law is not there to administer justice. It's there to uphold the law. That's the purpose.
React. It's very reactionary, I find.
It is very static, and it is very formulaic because that's the nature of it. And so what happens are, for example, it starts off with an aggressive person simply being sedated. So, for example, Ella could have gone to the doctors. I'm not sleeping right, doctor. I'm just not sleeping. I'm all stressed. I'm all worried. What do doctors do? Dish out the prescription. Here you are, Ella. Here's your sleeping tablets. Here's your antidepressants. Come back when you need more, because we're here to make money for Big Pharma. Right? I know I'm being cynical, but hey, I'm an undertaker. I've seen all the pills. I've seen all the tablets on the bedside table. I've seen all that. So when Ella's suddenly realized by putting in the sleeping tablets, even in a half dose, all of a sudden, Sani's coming back and he's going straight to his room and falling asleep. She can go, whew, I won't be getting a black eye tonight. Then, having succeeded that, you know, as they say, climbing the mountain is many small steps.
Yep.
She gets the stage right. Oh, how about these antidepressants in the tea, in the soup? You know, and she'll have a wee taste. Does it taste different? No, it doesn't actually. Well, I tell you what, hang about, you know, we've got a garden. Let's go out the garden shed. Oh, here we go. The weed killer. Right? Will that work?
Yep.
Better believe it'll work. Absolutely it'll work.
Well, we don't want to give away too much. We need people to read the chapter to see how she gets rid of them. And the nice relationship she had with Patsy, who was my aunt's name, my favorite aunt at one point. She was fantastic. So I had another link to this story, which was really good. But
the thing about Patsy was a confidant.
Yes.
That Ella
needed,
but then latterly discovered that she didn't, because the confidant had too much confidential information.
Okay, we're going to leave it at that. People have to read it. Let's leave it there. I don't want to give away all your books because I have specific questions all the time, and that's the hardest thing for me when I'm making questions for you is how do I give or ask this question without giving away too much? And you want to pique the interest, but you don't want to give it away. And so let's leave it at that. Patsy's a lovely person talking with Ella. They help each other. Hopefully you read and you get something neat out of that. Something else I really liked about this book, and I'm going to go back to the first book as well. So when we have Search for a Whisky Bothy and you look at the first pages, or not the first page before, the introduction, and you always had these notes sections. And I don't know if we can see it, the notes. So for us in this one, Search for a Whisky Bothy, the notes, but you start with something different now in Stories from a Whisky Bar. You'll go, and I'll pick one. Actually, I'll do Ella because we've just been talking about her. So chapter 2, I believe.
Chapter 3.
Chapter 2 is your life. Yep. Yeah. Okay.
Page 40.
So how two friends implement a dangerous plan to improve their quality of life, oblivious to the odds stacked against them by fate. So you have these little sections up there, and it gives us an idea as to what you're reading. What I liked about it is after I read the chapter, I would go back to that little statement that you had and make the links that I didn't make prior to it, which is really good. And I like that. Something that brings me back into the book is great. And your last chapter did the same thing in more detail. So I love that part. So thank you. When did you come up with that idea? And why did you add these synopses? So why?
Yeah. That's inspired by bottles of whiskey and their tasting notes.
Okay. I love it.
So what you have in a bottle of whiskey is classic, rich, honeyed and malty, soft vanilla and coconut character, citrus fruit freshness, orchard fruits, and hazelnuts. Now, that is the producer's description.
We have the same bottle.
To help you get your bearings around Isle of Arran.
Okay.
Isle of Arran, by the way, in next year celebrates its 30th anniversary as a distillery.
Will it? Is it worth going there this summer? Sorry, as an aside, because I'm still picking, I'll pick your brain about this later, places I have to visit. That might be a have to visit as well this summer.
It depends on your budget and your time, because
22 days.
22 days, that's a good length of time. Are you hiring a car?
Yes, we are.
Right, so then it is worth a visit because you're going over on the ferry.
Yeah.
and you get to see not just Arran Distillery, but Lag Distillery as well.
Yes.
So there's 2 distilleries to visit. And the thing about Arran is that it still remains one of the very affordable, integrity delivered, accessible, consistently bottled, value for money single malts out there. It's an absolute benchmark. And I must commend, when you've got other distilleries with some variable batches going on, which is inexcusable and frankly unacceptable for what they're charging, then I must commend Arran, a relatively young distillery who are properly respecting their customers bottle after bottle. Now, it's not an easy thing to do, but it just all hinges. How much will you spend on the casks? It's all about the casks. If you've got good casks, you're getting consistency, because primarily it's not the absolute consistency of flavor, it's the consistency of quality that people are tuning into and are investing in. But that's where you have these little pre-season, these precursors up at the top of the chapters, is basically a tasting note for what's in the chapter in one paragraph.
Yes, and that's
inspired by what you find in many whiskey bottles.
Well, thank you for that, and I enjoy it. I really did, and like I said, I liked going back to it to see. However, the back of the whiskey bottles, I tend to not believe what they have to say. I go back in my flavor palette, and they don't match very often. But
yeah,
let's continue. Drama at the Glenclyde.
Yeah.
Great chapter. I liked it. And we were talking about the people, and you just this week about people working in the distilleries and them being taken advantage of. So we're going to leave that. And so if people want to go to what you would just, I think it was 4 days ago that you even put this online. Go back to that as you're reading this, and kind of a link. I like it. So short story, started to realize that you've been leaving something called Easter eggs. So my gaming friends talk about Easter eggs, where you're having something, and then if you know about something intimately, you'll pick out those little Easter eggs that are great. So happy surprises, findings here and there, and there's lots in the years 1824. That's where I think I found the most. Well, the very last chapter, but that one. So I had to do a quick research to make my mind at ease that there was never a Glenclyde, and you mentioned that just recently, but when I read this, it was before that, and that here's the names that you had for the bottles: Glentartan, Royal Endorsement, Empire Legacy, or Wee Cheeky Dougie Whiskies. But you do add information of real places and real situations. So I'm talking about Bowling, Dumbarton, Little Mill, and stealing expensive whiskey like they did in Angel's Share. So there's things you're picking out. So all this is leading me to believe that I've probably overlooked something in this chapter. So is there a hidden piece somewhere that I didn't see specifically about this short story? I was a Vide Vision. I'm guessing you were referring to Aqua Vide. Glenclyde, I don't know if you had something in mind or a combination of things for that. Somi Singh, so Rabjir and Sakinder Singh, the Whiskey Exchange. That's who I think that is, and I might be wrong. And Sandra, Hamish, Alistair, and Weasel. I don't know if they were anyone of note, but it'd be kind of neat to see if there was specifically in mind.
Right. Drama at Glenclyde is really a fictional documentary.
Okay, so it's representative of something.
Absolutely, it's representative of the old whiskey companies before they were consolidated into the big companies.
Okay.
And the fact that they knew they had valuable stocks, but they never really bothered about them. So the bosses, they basically spend most of their time out playing golf and wining and dining and living a life of relative luxury, whilst leaving their
The running of the distillery.
Really, essentially, the running of the warehouse, the business, to their poorly paid staff.
Yeah.
Who basically had to shut up and get on with it. This is very cultural in Britain. There's a saying in Britain that you have those who manage and those who work. Those who work have to manage because those who manage don't work. And it's very true.
Yep. Constantly
true, in fact. And I know that there's a certain amount of generalization, and that there are big companies in which effective managers do a lot of work. There's no denying it. But this very divided and divisive culture within businesses that actually undermine businesses by employers alienating the staff beneath them rather than treating them as part of the essential resource of the business. And you see this in the fact that in many distilleries in the old days, right up into the 1990s, staff were basically expected to take a proportion of their earnings in just pilfered spirit. I mean, this is real, and it's not just occasional. It's absolutely routine. And of course, this has suited the bosses because they could, if they wanted rid of a member of staff for any reason, if maybe they were just getting a bit too tired to do the job, or they were becoming a liability in any way, they just corner them and say, right, you've been thieving, you're drunk, and this is in breach of health and safety, right?
Yep.
I'll tell you what, we'll make you a little cash offer, just walk away and we're done and dusted. Meanwhile, they had managers in offices who would never even visit the warehouses they were responsible for. They'd pop down occasionally, go in the front door, hands in pockets, everything fine, anything to report, any problems, right? Remember, I'm watching you. The next mistake, you'll be out the door. One of their favorite quotes is, I'll just give you enough rope. I'll always give you enough rope. If you choose to hang yourself, it's up to you. This is a sort of motivation that is just standard script for right up into the 1990s. In fact, I'm sure it's still even happening now. It's just so antiquated and counterproductive. Because, as they say, you need everybody in the oars for a boat to stay straight in a choppy sea. Everybody needs to be pulling together. But you see the very antiquated, self-referential nature of many whiskey businesses, and the fact that they very rarely see the beyond the heather and the hills around them. Even now, and something as an observer as much as a narrator, that I see that the blind spot they have when it comes to their most informed and educated and engaged customers. They just don't connect. They never sit round the table and say, right, what would you like to share with us? What do you see as the future? This is why we're in such interesting times, Dolph, because in Texas, the Texas Whisky Association is being far more proactive in actually connecting and engaging with the enthusiasts who know such an incredible amount about bourbon and whiskey and distilling, and often have, you will often find now at master classes at whiskey events, it's the audience knows more than the master blenders. Because
sometimes it's the presenter especially. So if it's just the flashy individual up front.
Yeah,
I've seen that a lot, and obviously you have, and you feel a bit sorry for them in those situations because it's not them, it's someone that put them in that situation. But and because people like you, we're online, we get a lot of information, and those that care, if this is your hobby, and if you're anything like me, if it's a hobby, you jump into it wholeheartedly. And the people in Texas, I'm guessing, doing the same thing as us, if you're listening to them, that's kind of nice.
It's such
I don't feel that.
Yeah. We don't feel it in Scotch whiskey at all.
Okay.
It's very much a demarcation. There's a huge barrier between producers, customers, and the attitude is often the customers should know their place. Shut up and buy.
Shut up and buy my stuff. Yeah.
Shut up. You're totally agreeing with me. You know, what an extraordinary conversation we're having here. This is 2024.
Yep.
And even the small distilleries, you know, you're looking for them to meaningfully connect using social media, and yet these barriers are still there. That they almost as if they're caught in the bright lights of the technology and don't actually know what to do. And yet, when it comes to marketing of your product, if you know how to successfully engage with social media, you never need to spend a penny advertising in a magazine that nobody's even reading anyway, because nobody's buying, because it's just full of adverts and filler.
Yep. Yeah.
And that's the reality. But
when's the last time you looked in a magazine?
Oh, years. Absolutely years.
I think so for me too. There's a few online ones. Sorry, O.S.W.A.s puts one out every month. I read that. That's it. Yeah. Beyond that, I can't remember the last one I saw. I agree completely.
And we won't even start discussing these international awards and, you know, trophies and dinners and all the rest of it. It's exactly. But it's almost naively so. There's a lack of fine tuning going on there. And there's the complete, it's almost as if there's still this heartfelt belief that so long as they've got a wee gold sticker in the front of the label on their heavily discounted single malt in your local supermarket, that people will still want to buy it. But I'm looking at I was in my local supermarket today. I was looking at what's on the shelf at £23 a bottle, half price. Half price. Right. So you're all talking 46 Canadian dollars. And nobody's buying it because it's just a boring brand. That's all it is. And yet what does the distillery do to tackle this? They generate more marketing. And they continue to tell us, oh, we're unique, we're special, we're rare. You know,
our water is beautiful. It's from the mountain.
It's so pure, and you know, from the fresh mountain, blah blah blah. It's just become white noise.
Yeah.
And I honestly don't think the industry's even got another move. They're going to have to wait now to get seriously hit by the next global recession. And the big markets they put all their faith in, India and China, they are not materializing. Sure, yes, some demand there, but it's very conditional.
And we have people I know a lot of distillers here in Alberta, and several of them making treks to Japan and China with the hope that happens. And I'm just hoping that their liquor is not being reverse engineered and made in massive quantities. But I don't know. Let's get back to them. Let's do this because we're up to my favorite chapter. So Voyage of the Kelpie, right? My absolute favorite. And it's got so many things that spoke to me directly. So the captain getting well-deserved second chance. So something went bad. That's how you introduce it. But he has a second chance. Them taking Edward under their wing. I'm a teacher. So them taking this young boy, everyone, taking him under their wing, and he prospers. He does well. Going to one of my favorite distilleries and sleeping there that night. The hospitality that the captain and everyone else on the crew get at every one of their stops made me feel good. The inclusion of the eagles at Erin as they're passing by as an omen for the captain. And again, that omen goes into what you did with the spirit safe. So I've got a quote here. Let's do that. He gazed. Boom. All right. So he gazed for a few minutes at the cooled liquor inside the windowed brass box, pouring out the tarnished tap and into a green-stained waiting glass bowl. Feeding towards feeding onwards into the collecting tanks, and for a moment he felt something start to change in his awareness. So I'm guessing that you've seen the spirit safe a couple times at Bunnahabhain, because you're describing it. So I think you have a picture in mind when you're doing it. And why did the spirit safe remind you of the captain and retirement? Because I think this is a theme that comes up often. So a change in life towards my years in retirement. So why did it make the captain, who was a lot older than me, think of that when he was looking at the spirit safe?
Quite simply, it articulated the flow of living spirit over time.
Okay.
And the time is constant. There were a number of omens in that book for Captain Nemo, who's well into his 80s. He can't really retire because he's never been well paid.
Yeah.
They want him to go on for as long as possible, for a simple reason that at that point, the experience that captains had in relation to what they were paid was just phenomenal. Knowing the tides, the water, moods and temperaments, the weather patterns, not just up and down the west coast of Scotland, but across to Ireland as well, over the North Channel, which can be very treacherous if you get it wrong, particularly in a flat-keeled boat, which the puffer is. And it's the weight of the ballast and the cargo that gives it stability.
Okay.
But that this is a tale that is very much reflecting the culture around West Coast whiskey in the 1940s, 50s, and early 60s,
okay,
when the puffers were still in the go, until they were completely phased out. And there's still a lot of sentimentality now towards them because they represent an earlier, simpler way of life, which is now been permanently lost. Although you can go a cruise on a restored puffer, the Vic 52, which is now a registered charity. And it gives you a feel for the past. But Captain Nemo's crew, he doesn't get on with his first mate because his first mate wants to be the captain.
Yep.
The captain won't retire, so the first mate's being held back, and he's got a family to support. And then you've got the engineer who just wants a quiet life and is basically spending most of his time actually keeping an old boiler steam engine going, keeping it working. And it gives a very sympathetic narrative as to these people who carried whiskey from the Highlands and Islands down to Glasgow, and they never get a mention in the official whiskey books. They never get talked about.
Yep.
The nearest we get is in the Parahandy Tales, which is really I'm trying to think the name of the author now. His name escapes me. It's in Scotland. There's an author that has a series of books on a puffer called the Parahandy.
Okay.
And they still, even to this day, there's a lot of sentimentality because of the uniqueness of these boats in Scotland. There's nothing quite else like them in the world. And I wanted to, having been in a puffer and having seen a puffer when I was a very small boy being taken into Glasgow and standing in the banks of the River Clyde,
nice,
and seeing the smell of the soot coming out their chimneys, and you could see that you had these larger than life characters on board, and you see it represented in an old black and white film called The Maggie, which I recommend you look out for. You probably find it online.
Okay.
It is certainly one of the most authentic films, an Ealing comedy. In fact, it's the second Scottish Ealing comedy after Whiskey Galore, and in fact, it's a better film.
The Maggie.
The Maggie, it's called.
Okay, I've got it written down. Done. Thank you. I'll do that. Well, Whiskey Galore and Angel's Envy. I do like whiskey movies. I do.
Uh-huh.
So that's
Angel's Share.
what did I call it?
Angel's Envy.
Oh, sorry. That's a whiskey
bourbon.
itself. Sorry. Let's get on to a next chapter. So that's good.
Yeah.
So that was my favorite chapter because it linked me to it. The last chapter became my favorite at the end, just because it made me go back and forth. But that, as the initial story, that's the one that got me. In the short story called Chuckles, you describe a lot of what I've seen in the whiskey scene over the last 15 years.
You've seen it. You have seen it.
And everyone out there. So you're buying into the corporate life of whiskey. People saying, well, smooth as a whiskey note. They talk about the exclusivity of it all, the right people going to the right things. And anyways, the guys that do fill their flask. And you did this, and I didn't think of it because I haven't really noticed it until a long time ago I did. They'd have their flask and they'd go to the different, they'd have 3 or 4 drams in the little cups, and they'd fill their little flask. I haven't noticed it for a while, but when you mentioned that in the story, it brought back the memories. So you also mentioned the fictional whiskey Malt Maestro, which is cute, site, as well as Whiskey Fun, whiskey-based sites. And this made me think of an interview that you did with Serge from Whiskey Fun. And this was a long time ago. This was when you were starting off, I think. And I believe it was there that I learned about Malt Maniacs in the first place. I think that's the interview I saw where I looked up Malt Maniacs to see who that was. And that's where I learned that you were a Malt Maniac, and that Davin de Kergamo's name, I hadn't met him at this point, but I remember seeing, because he was the Canadian guy in the group.
That's right.
I'm wondering, were you invited, or were you one of the original members? And then, because you're not part of them anymore, neither is Broom, why did you retire from that group? Who brought you in? And then why did you get out?
I was invited by Davin de Kergamo.
Really?
Founders, yeah. He invited me in.
That's fantastic. I love that. Okay.
Yeah, but what I noticed was this was shortly before he stepped back and handed over the reins to the rest of the Malt Maniacs.
Okay.
I met most of them when we had a hospitality weekend with Diageo. And I must say, generally, I had a very positive impression of most of the people there. Mm-hmm. And I found there was very amicable and very knowledgeable about whiskey. But literally, although I'd contributed an article myself, which was an interview with the proprietor of Annandale Distillery, I noticed there really wasn't much happening with the Malt Maniacs apart from the Malt Maniacs Awards, which I participated in one year as a judge, although it was a very late decision to involve me. And by the time I got the samples, I had a terrible cold, and it ended up only had about 11 days to get through several hundred samples, which was kind of really I had to keep things very short and to the point. But I really thought that actually, in retrospect, as an onliner, I really need to be seen to be separate and fully independent.
Okay.
And I kind of discussed this and gave my leaving notice to the then coordinator of the Malt Maniacs, which was fine. But it really hasn't been particularly active for quite a while now, online.
Right.
But I think it's just one of these part of the evolving sequences within the whiskey scene in relation to the internet. It was only natural that you'd get a group of international enthusiasts to come together through personal messaging, through social medias. And I think that the whiskey industry, they were looking for an opportunity for an endorsement. And I think that latterly there were some signals, and I know that Johannes van der Heuvel was concerned that the Malt Maniacs were getting too close to the industry.
Okay.
But I really wasn't aware of this when I joined. But yeah, I left a year later, and that's it. There's really nothing more to add. I know that Dave Broom left, but I don't have any contact with anybody. But there again, even when I was a member, I didn't have much contact. It's just what it is.
Okay. No, that's good. There was no big blow up of anything. It was just you deciding you're going to part ways, and that's probably the best way to part ways, I think.
Yeah.
I don't like big drama. In
retrospect, I should probably have never joined at all, to keep separate, keep a distance. But at the same time, I was very curious. I'd have to join to actually see for definite what it was like. Yeah. So whether it be 1 year or 10 years, I did my little stint there, and now I think I'm officially declared as a retired Malt Maniac.
That's what it says on the site. It does. Yeah. And I would have jumped at the opportunity myself to become a Malt Maniac. I think that would have been fantastic. But what this does lead us to, because we've talked about it twice now, so awards, so international awards and their awards. Why don't we talk about the O.S.W.A.s a little bit? So if I click on this, the nominations, this was in September, and people have until the 20th to vote. So they have until tomorrow to vote. But do you want to talk about the O.S.W.A.s a little bit, and how this is not the typical give me money and I'll give you a gold star?
Absolutely not. The Online Scotch Whisky Awards is a completely independent and autonomous award system in which nothing is asked from any distillery at all whatsoever. No money, no samples, nothing. What happens is, because it's very easy to set up an algorithm now, the Scotch Whisky Awards, the Online Scotch Whisky Awards, gets nominations from a wide group of online whisky enthusiasts. And it's really, I think, a kind of progress on from the Malt Maniacs Awards, which tended to focus and give the awards to quite expensive and obscure, unobtainium whiskies, your Broras, your Port Ellens, your Milburns, whiskies which were never accessible to the majority, let alone affordable. Whereas with the Online Scotch Whisky Awards, we're really wanting the affordable stuff, the available stuff, the accessible stuff, that anyone can go to the Online Scotch Whisky Awards and say, right, if I'm starting a whiskey collection tomorrow, this is where I start. So it really kicked off the opportunity. The magic moment was pandemic lockdown, where literally within the space of a month, the Scotch whisky industry was completely turned on its head and was 100% dependent on online sales through Amazon, supermarkets, and specialist retailers, with a few specialist retailers actually doing local home deliveries. At the same time, hotels shut, bars shut, airports shut. All of a sudden, blends, nobody's buying blends, because you'd walk into the supermarket with your mask on and you'd see people were starting to buy single malts and rum. That's what people were buying. And one reason was because they went onto eBay and they got home delivery of a converted garden shed, which became their outdoor mini bar.
Yep.
So they set it up in the privacy of their own garden, where they could freely sit outside the house, get some fresh air, have a wee drink, have a one-to-one social, have a bit of FaceTime, and and screen time with relatives, and that was as good as they were going to get. Now, the industry panicked. Of course, they won't say that, but they were not prepared for this.
No.
And this, suddenly you had distillery-only bottlings appearing with online retailers. Otherwise, they'd sit in the distilleries for how long? 1 year, 2 years, 3 years?
Yep.
Nobody knew, because it's the first time there has been this pan-global population control exercise facilitated by technology. An absolute first. So I'm sitting there, putting out the content, publishing my books, getting good sales because people are stuck at home and they want a whiskey book that's different, that's going to entertain them as well as give them information. An easy read, like a chapter of Dram, that sort of book. And so I'm thinking also, third option, online Scotch Whisky Awards. It's not something I could do on my own, Dolph, because it's too much one person. It needs to be done as a team effort.
Yep.
And really the best person for this was Roy Duff at Aquavit, because I knew he had a marketing background in web design.
And he did well with this. So I'll just throw that up. That's his as well.
Yeah. And he's done an absolutely magnificent job of it. And now we're into the fourth year. It's 2024.
Yep.
The online Scotch Whisky Awards kicked off in 2020. And we know for a fact that the winners of these awards absolutely, for sure, generate a lot of attention and sales of these brands for the producers globally. Absolutely. So both Roy and I are delighted with the success of the online Scotch Whisky Awards because it's tangibly transparent and a very different model to the conventional award system, some of which are fine. When they get the experts in, and the experts are sitting round tasting blind, as they do in the Scottish Field Challenge, I've got a lot of time for that award. But there's others. It's all about the meal ticket.
Give it to me. Yep, I agree.
All about the money. And when you see obscure liquors getting 90 plus out of 100 for absolutely no reason whatsoever, it doesn't get more blatant and patronizing than that. It's so condescending.
And it turns you off. It really does when you see that. And it's like, we have these 3 awards. And it's like, don't do that. just don't. But I'm really happy that you're doing this. And people should watch. Again, they can vote until, I think it's midnight, your time tomorrow.
Not a lot of time, but still time to vote. All you need is a Google account, because the Google account lets us monitor the algorithms for consistent behavior and patterns.
Okay. And does the calculations more easily. And
it does all the calculations, absolutely. It helps with information processing.
Thank you for that, sir. And people should get more of that information. I do. It's fun. I love doing things online. And ever since COVID, I enjoyed it. The very first month of COVID, I started with my online tastings with the Alberta Scotch Society. And that's where we flourished. We tripled our membership, and I was able to get whiskeys out there to people and meet people throughout the province that I never would have before. And still, to this day, still doing great. Let's go back to this one. What's this make you think of? Salty Wheels.
Oh, so, my goodness.
I've got that picture and this. And is this your bike? Because you're there, but I remember seeing you previously, but I don't remember seeing this bike. So is this the one that you got the speed record with or not?
Yes. Now,
it is.
Absolutely.
Okay.
Now, just to clarify, you see it there with what's called a dustbin spoiler.
Okay.
So that large red nose over the front of the bike is to greatly increase the aerodynamic efficiency.
Right.
But we discovered shortly before we went out that we couldn't use it because they changed the rules and regulations. But I put all my sponsors' decals on it. By the way, Serge Valentin sponsored me for that.
Oh, nice.
He did. What a
show that
gentleman.
back up there. And those decals there. And it would have helped with the salt and the sand as well.
Well, it wasn't the sand. It was salt and salt.
Salt. Okay.
And this created, I mean, I've been biking for over 20 years.
Okay.
My usual bike, now I've since sold it because it's just got too big for me, was a 900cc Triumph Thunderbird. Big triple. Okay. British-built bike back then. Wonderful bike, best bike ever had. But I've had several bikes over the years, all very different. I really enjoy biking. At the moment, I'm actually kind of winding things back. I've got a little Honda CRF 230 scrambly type bike. So it's either on road or off road. So perfectly road legal, but I can take it across fields, which I'm not looking to go so fast as I used to. For Bonneville, by the way, that record still stands.
Does it?
It does.
Excellent.
It's a 250 Royal Enfield engine called a GT Continental.
Okay.
And 4 gears. And it's a terrible engine, by the way, but it had a unique feature. It had basically a push rod in it, which means that the intake and exhaust valves are at opposite ends of the combustion chamber.
Okay.
Now, this was a very short period of motorcycle innovation from the 1950s through the 1960s. And it was really the best producers were Ermachi with their 250 racing engine, where they put the push rod horizontally, where it could keep its integrity of its structure. Mm-hmm. But BSA, Royal Enfield, and Honda briefly produced these vertical rod contraptions, and they were basically, they didn't last very long because internal and the intake of pre-combustion gases and external was decided, you may as well have them beside each other at the top of the chamber where it's going to be done most efficiently. This is what we have now. But it was an obscure class for the Southern California Timing Association, who are the benefactors of Speed Week in August on the Bonneville Salt Flats in Utah. Okay. And this is where you've probably heard of the film The World's Fastest Indian.
Yep.
Great film, by the way. A lot of the best American films are not Hollywood. They're made by foreign filmmakers in the United States and therefore give a much more wholesome reality as to American society. They're not so airbrushed and sanitized and dumbed down as many Hollywood movies are.
And violent.
And
you need the violence.
Absurdly violent. Just ridiculously violent. Pathologically so, to be honest. It really betrays the sentiment behind their composition. But this was to do with a New Zealander called, Burt Munro.
Okay.
And he made his way by cargo boat all the way to the US, completely unexpected, completely unannounced, to race his Indian Scout, which he'd modified. And at first they wouldn't let him, but latterly they did. And he set consecutive world land speed records. And he became an absolute fixture of Bonneville Speed Week in the process. And from the Isle of Man, which of course is the home of the international road racing event called the TT.
The Isle of Man.
crazy event. The speed these bikes are going, they're going over 200 miles per hour in public roads. You know, there's no room for maneuver.
No.
None. You know,
You don't
one
want to.
one error, one issue, and it's a wipeout. And unfortunately, that does happen. But that's, of course, also what makes it absolutely unique and such a notable event for many motorcyclists who are into road racing. But a team went from the Isle of Man in 2000 and set a world land speed record. Not 2000, I think it's 2010. Fairly early on in the 2000s. And they set a consecutive world land speed record of over 200 miles per hour on a 500cc motorcycle, which is quite an extraordinary feat of engineering and riding. And they decided they'd go back again. And I was connected because I'd sourced a bottle of whiskey for a local motorcycle charity. And I arranged to auction 2 bottles signed by motorcycle racers to raise money for this group. So they invited me into the team just as a helper. And then latterly, due to one thing and another, I ended up being asked if I wanted to race a bike there. And I said, fine, but I'm not prepared to do over 150 miles an hour on salt. Because when salt is running in salt, in other words, when you've got a salty surface and a salt surface on your rubber tires, you're basically creating something similar in consistency to sheet ice.
Okay. Ooh.
Now, that's fine if you're in a nice straight line, but salt flats aren't that flat. They're really quite lumpy and bumpy.
Okay.
But they said, here's a wee category. It's 250cc, blown fuel, so it's gas, and it's push rod.
Yeah, I'll
and I'm
show
sure
the
it's
bike again.
a push rod engine. So it's a little motorcycle with a twin tank, one for ice, to liquid cool the fuel as it's drawn in and through an enhanced carburetor with an enhanced spark plug, and then it's drawn out through a turbo. So that in fact is a turbocharged 250cc single cylinder motorcycle. So really intricate engineering there. But I was lucky because my engineer I used to run a motorcycle shop on the Isle of Man and set up racing bikes for TT racers. So he's excellent, superb engineer. We're still friends, actually. I still occasionally visit and take him a bottle of whiskey as an ongoing thank you.
Good.
But that record, because it's such an obscure class, and because only Americans could compete in Bonneville during pandemic lockdown, it meant that, Americans are into big engines, not little engines.
Yeah.
And not little weird engines, quirky engines.
A one cylinder is, I think that's the definition of quirky and weird.
It's,
I couldn't picture it.
Yeah. Even turbocharging any single cylinder engine needs an awful lot of cushioning and perfect timing.
Well, I'm glad you said that it was bumpy as well, because if you look at a picture like that, you're thinking flat. And that's not a better picture. Sorry. But online, I remember watching you then, and it seemed flat. It seemed like it would be a regular road. It was my perception of it. So how bumpy? Is it like very bumpy at one place or just kind of rolling?
Depends where you are and depends what track you're on. There's 3 race tracks, the small, the medium, and the long. Now, I started out in the small, and the small was nice and smooth.
And those are the first days are the small. It gets the longer track later in. Okay.
Yeah. And then, as the week goes on, and there's fewer vehicles competing, they start to close down the small track and they move on to the medium track, where you've got heavier vehicles creating bigger channels in the snow, in not the snow, it looks like snow, in the salt. So they're really starting to break up the salt at that point. And then when you get onto the long course, where the existing world land speed record exists from the Thrust 2, which was basically a long stretched streamline a car with 2 jet engines attached to
I
it,
know.
which they
Just
no
looked
longer,
like a rocket.
because it was too dangerous. Yeah. That the existing world land speed record exists on the long course, and I had to go on the long course, and I actually had to get forensics done and speak to racers that had been down and said, which side should I go on, left, right, or down the middle?
Okay.
Where's the least ruttage? Because
Right.
you're not going to notice it in a great big turbocharged truck, but on a small 250 motorcycle, which is rather fragile,
Yeah.
you really are going to notice it. But I was lucky that I took a line on the extreme left. So there was about 3 feet of salt.
Okay.
Where you were getting towards the actual border of the race line itself of the course.
That's a bit dangerous, though.
It's quite dangerous because if you go over it, you're disqualified.
Okay.
Because you're now racing off the course.
Oh, it's not a fence. It's a
not a
line
fence.
that you can't get. Okay.
It's
I
a
was thinking
painted
fence,
orange
and that
line.
was really scary. Okay.
A painted orange line with bright orange bollards.
Oops.
So you don't want to hit them. So
Nope.
I had to kind of go right down this line, keeping the guiding edge immediately on my left and keeping as streamlined as possible. And I beat the previous record was 69.7 miles per hour, which is the average of 2 runs, Dolph.
Okay.
And I was very fortunate in that I put it more down to the bike than me, although I'd lost a lot of weight to get on the bike. And also it helped that I wasn't a bike racer. So I never hammered the bike too hard. I coaxed the bike more than pushed the bike.
Okay.
So I really fettled it, particularly jumping from 3rd to 4th gear, because there was a huge gap between these 2 gears that you couldn't overcome. It was just the layout of the Royal Enfield engine.
Okay.
But so even when I changed to absolute full throttle in 3rd, it would be stuttering as it tried to pick up momentum in 4th gear, even though took me about 30 to 45 seconds to gradually let the lever out.
Wow. Okay.
That's how delicate it was. But hey, I upped the record to 74.7, and that record still stands today. That's 8 years.
You used to have, I think it was a plaque, was it not, behind you at one point with that? You got a plaque, but it used to be behind you, and I don't think it is anymore. I don't think it's up on the shelf in the Bothy.
No, this plaque that you're probably thinking of is my YouTube.
Oh, that one. Yeah.
This is for 100,000 subscribers.
You didn't have a plaque for the Speed Award. I thought you did.
A trophy.
A trophy. Okay.
And the trophy's under lock and key at the moment.
And you do talk about that. Actually, you do. And within that chapter, and you do the dichotomy. You talk about your whole travels and the different people on your team and your job within the team and how other people helped you. But you also did that at the same time as you were talking about you were linking it to your mother's fall into dementia and your work and what you did there at home and how both were happening at the same time. Now, I'm wondering, do these 2 events, making the commitment to care for your mom and attaining the speed record, or going there to race because you didn't know if you were going to make the record, but you wanted to race, although very different, give you the same feeling of accomplishment that you've done something? And because that was why I thought you put these both in the same chapter.
Yeah, very much so. I wanted to have the contrast that you have these 2 very, very different situations and circumstances in life completely overlapping simultaneously.
Yeah.
I was fortunate in that I'd been looking after her for 8 years without a break. My brother helped me, but he's just not programmed to be as hands-on. BigClive.com, that's him. He's a lovely, lovely person in his own way, but he's very autistic.
Okay.
So he has we're both very different people in many respects, although we have a lot in common. But he would look after her as best he could. But when I was away in the United States, I'd qualified for respite care. So I was able to take my mum in the car up to the local cottage hospital where they looked after her for 10 days while I was away.
All right.
And I think it was a good change for her. It was a different, stimulating environment. But also, I think she was glad when I came back again and carried her out into the car, carried her back upstairs into her own bed.
Right.
Because she
wasn't at the point where she was walking down anymore. She wasn't taking that daily walk anymore.
She couldn't do it.
She couldn't do it.
It was part of the deterioration, which frankly was a lot to do with Lyme's disease and not dementia.
Okay.
Because Lyme's disease displays symptoms that mimic dementia. But we know she was bitten by a tick.
Oh, okay.
And we know she got the bullseye rash. And we know that it wasn't successfully treated because so little was known about it in those days.
Well, I was happy to read that chapter because my mother going through dementia now, and especially the link, and this is in other chapters about the medication, because the medications they've been giving my mom in different times, and I can't stop all the medication. She has so many things wrong with her, and she has been on medication since I've been a little bitty doll. But how I don't know how to say this. The medication that she had probably 2 years ago or a year and a half ago, changing her personality, exemplifying it, almost making it so that she was almost lobotomized. This sounds horrible, but taking away all of the personality completely to try and offset the effects of the dementia and making her worse. And I'm going to credit you with this. When you see something so drastic, you have to work on it. You have to go with the situation and deal with it. So I said no. I said, whatever. This is not going to happen. We're going to take her off of this medication, and we'll live with whatever happens without that medication, because what's happening now is not something that she would want, and definitely not something I think is beneficial for her. And you made these decisions with your mom as well in relation to medication. Yours was a little bit more, you were able to take her off of medication, I think, almost completely. Is that correct?
Completely. And what I did was I would give her multivitamin enhanced smoothies.
Right.
So I'd get banana, kiwi fruit, apples, and I'd blend it all up.
Yep.
Because she had difficulty swallowing because of her mental situation. But by having thick, gloopy stuff, she could manage that from a bottle, which I was happy to do. I took her off all her medication because I didn't think it was helping her. I discussed it thoroughly with the doctor. The doctor didn't get in my way about it.
Nice.
Which is nice, because sometimes they can really start to become threatening sometimes. And I basically focused on practical holistic nutrition for her, including the fact that she had arthritis in her hands, which I treated with castor oil, rubbing it on her hands, which relieved the pain. And then laterally, I discovered cat's claw, which is a herbal supplement.
Okay.
And I tried it on myself first before I gave it in a smaller portion to her. And that definitely helped soften her arthritis and give her more mobility.
Okay.
But there comes a point where she was getting more ill more often with viruses. And there came a point where I said to the doctor, you know, I don't want her being put onto a whole lot of heavy medication and antibiotics when she's in her 80s, because all it is doing is sort of helping her recover slowly until the next time.
Yeah.
So she passed away peacefully in her own bed, in her own home. And I was glad that I had the unique situation that I could do that, which unfortunately is not available to an awful lot of people.
No.
It's just reality. But it's certainly the fact that I was an undertaker for over 20 years. I was prepared to just hand in my notice and walk away. I had paid off my mortgage. I could sell my house. I did invest what I'd got from the house into an nest egg for later in life.
Mm-hmm.
So I never spent much of it to enhance my pension, because there would be a employer's pension shortfall, because I was in my job for 21 years and not 30 years.
Oh, okay.
So I was in a position as a single man that I was prepared to take the risk and to do that. And it worked out quite well for me. But many people they're not in that position. People's circumstances are different. And that's just the way of the world. It's just the way it is.
It is, but it's part of your personality, I think, as well, because you put yourself out there and you do things that might not be the norm, and you're okay with that, and you live with the consequences of it. And it's worked out for you. It's done well. And I think your investments in whiskeys as well. I don't know if you have the same amount that you had way back when, because I think I either saw you or read or talked to you about selling whiskeys or getting rid of them. I'm guessing that a certain investments helped you as well, I think,
totally,
in your retirement, because you are retired, even though you're working a whole
semi-retired.
Okay. What are you not doing? Well,
what's
your job? What would you say?
I still work part-time and help out local funeral directors in the island.
Okay, done. All right. So I'm thinking about the retirement thing too, but I don't want to be a semi-retired teacher, because that would make me a substitute teacher. I don't know if I'd like that. I don't know. Anyway, let's get back to the book. And we've got a couple chapters left, but this, I like the journal entry format that you did in the second last chapter. So talking about Waterhorse Distillery. So it was quick, it was energetic, it was fun. It's like boom, 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 small sentence all the way.
Yeah.
So what's the story? I've got 6 things I'm going to ask right here on the side. What's the story fashioned after one particular distillery? A couple of distilleries merged together. Is it a cautionary tale for the bright-eyed, bushy-tailed young distiller and brewer? Was it for that? Story of distasteful underbelly of the startup distilleries. How experience gets you somewhere, but you have to stick with it and work through the shit to make it work. Or that even if you're rich, you're going to get off no matter what. I'm wondering which one of these is kind of the set for this story. Or maybe all.
It's a little bit of a lot of things.
Okay.
It's a cautionary tale of people who know nothing about whiskey, who get whiskey mist, right? And they got all dewy-eyed. Oh, I'd love to have my own distillery and wander through the warehouses at midnight, sampling and checking my casks and whispering to the angels. And you find that whiskey enthusiasts have very romantic notions of the whiskey business, because they're not actually out in it, doing the groundwork, visiting cooperages around Europe, struggling to find the quality of casks at the right price, or dealing with the horrendous volume of obstruction from local government, of costs for plans and environmental impact things, and what are you going to do for zero emissions, and you need this consultant and that consultant, and before you know it, you're £5 million in, and you haven't even got a running still.
Yeah.
And then your health and safety people are all over distilleries like a rash. Oh, you can't do this, and that can't be there, and you've got to move this, and that can't be there. And
well, especially if there's a restaurant or the tasting bar with it, and we have the blast-proof windows that they have to care about, and the doors and what. Yes, so much.
Blast-proof windows. I mean, it is what it is. At the point, some of it is necessary, some of it is most certainly not. It is simply obstructing a commercial business in its legitimate activity, which is, again, part of it's to do with local governments who no longer receive central government funding, having no choice but to try and fund themselves. And therefore they do so through red tape.
The bureaucracy, yeah.
It is the bureaucracy. It gets obsessive, and you can have some little minority group, the friends of the local robins that nest in the hedge, come along, and before you know it, you've got to sit down and reassure them that the robins will have their own wee perchy stand, and you'll make sure it's organic peanuts that go in for them and not supermarket one. This is the absurdities that distilleries have to deal with. And then on top of it, they get taxed in the UK on a plenty tax from the Canadian government who'll follow suit. They'll be in lockstep all the way. Oh, we're going to tax you in the production of liquor because it's bad stuff, We've got to, we've got to charge you money so people don't get drunk all the time because it's too cheap. So you get the imposition of customs and excise duty, which is a unique, extremely high imposition of tax, which isn't going on to other businesses which are producing stuff that's equally as narcotic.
Or even alcohol, and for us in Alberta or Canada, all the way across, beer and wine not nearly taxed on the same amount. If you take it by the alcoholic volume, and that's what they want here within the province. If we could all be on the same level, you can tax me more because there's more alcohol within the bottle, but let's make it equal. Let's make it so that it's the same amount. 5% for a beer, it's going to go up at the same rate until we get to the 40 or the 62% or whatever it is, so that we're in step with everybody else. But no, alcohol, or not alcohol, but the liquor companies taxed way beyond what wine is, and beer,
beyond.
And why that specifically? And they keep asking, but good. The reason's because they make a lot of money.
Very simple reason: because of bureaucracy, because there are unaccountable people in power that are not held to account, and they do it because they can, and because they do it because there's something in it for them. And you've got the lobbyists. Bear in mind that prohibition in the United States was financed by the Rockefellers.
Sure.
Not because
I believe it.
Not because they wanted to stop people to stop drinking. It's great. They want people to consume too much alcohol because it helps sell medication from Big Pharma. Big time. They did it because when Henry Ford produced the Model T in any color you want so long as it's black, he gave his customers the choice of two engines. And this has been airbrushed right out of the history books. You could have the nasty, smoky, noisy, expensive petrol engine because they didn't know what to do else to do with oil, because they originally thought, well, we'll make it into lamp fuel, but they refined it into petroleum. So they had the petroleum engine that nobody wanted because it was nasty and noisy. Or you could have the nice, clean, environmental, efficient alcohol engine. NASCAR's an alcohol, a methanol engined race that still exists today from the bootlegging period. And this is why it was such a fierce and hotly contested situation. And the only reason they ended prohibition was because the mobsters were getting too powerful and buying too many politicians.
Yeah.
And they were disrupting.
And bypassing it. So we're not happy with the rich people. And one of my taglines online is tax the rich and tax them again. but let's get back to that one chapter, because the rich stayed rich no matter what. And you can tell by how you speak about the daughter and the wife and the puppy or her puppy within it. You're not too happy with the rich either. But so the commentary there being, even though they've gone under, I don't know what chapter it is or what they call it in England or Scotland, but you've done badly. You've proven that you can't run a company. Yeah. You affected all these other individuals, but still you get off scot-free.
Absolutely. It's business. It's business. Just go back to the City of London.
Okay. History. We do love our history.
Absolutely.
But, I'm getting back to the book, and this is the very last chapter. So after this, I'll ask you if there's anything you want to discuss, but let's get back to the last chapter, which became my favorite. Maybe not because it was of how it was written, but why it was written. You bring everything back together. And because of this chapter, I went back to search for a Whisky Bothy. I reread certain chapters there to see if the characters were the same, because in this chapter, you throw out names quite a bit. And what I wanted to do was go back to chapter 1, 2, 3 to make sure I'm getting the same people. You're talking about the same people. Yeah. And I have a couple questions. So, sure. Again, you tie together everything in a neat little package for the reader. It was fun sorting through all the different Easter eggs. And I'm going to ask you if I've missed some, but I found myself really searching for it. So it was quite fun. My favorite chapter because of that. I could not find a link between it, and you already saw that, and Girnahan. Oh, I'm so sorry. I'm just destroying that. But you did say it was you, and it was. You were there. It was obviously you were there, and you were in this last chapter. So I didn't know if there's more beyond that. Are Ross, Sandy, Jerry, and Nori mentioned previously? So they're in the last chapter, but I didn't know if they were anywhere else. Are they just replacements for Cammy and Corey, possibly, as the beer aficionado and or the new distiller type thing?
There are new characters in the last chapter.
Okay.
Because they are the fleeting extras that you find in an active community bar. So it wouldn't look natural if the only people there had been people from all the previous chapters.
Right.
It just wouldn't sit right. It would look too contrived. So you've got the characters, the librarians, Sandy and Jamil, who are in fact book detectives.
Which are fun.
So I'm narrating in that a anecdote of a very rare book that was faked very, very well, and it took private investigators to understand it. I mean, this is a book sold for millions of pounds, because these books, Audubon's Birds of America, is one of the most valuable manuscripts in the world because of the quality of the pictures in it and the rarity of it. But there are characters in there, Drippy. Oh my goodness.
Rufty, Tufty, and Drippy.
Rufty, Tufty, and Drippy. Now, they're gamers who like a whiskey, and they know their whiskies. And in fact, they're three guys that I used to train with in the local gym. And they said, "Are we going to be in your book?" And I says, "All right, then I'll write you in my book. I'll write you into the book."
And that's them.
And that's it. That's them. Rufty, Tufty, and Drippy. But they are very, very typical of a younger generation who are clued up, articulate. They never did well at school. But when it comes to online gaming, which is a massive multi-billion global business, they're right at the heart of it. And they're doing incredibly well. And of course, Drippy, the weirdest one, he in fact is he's a professional poker player.
Yeah.
And for the very best of the poker players on the global circuit, there's huge rewards because it is a massive participation and spectator sport. far bigger than.
I've
it's big
seen it
enough.
on Sportsnet and for us, and every afternoon, if you want to, you can watch poker from somewhere.
Yeah.
Online, you can do that. Let's go back to Heinrich from Sweden. Am I supposed to recognize him?
No.
Okay.
Heinrich is.
Okay.
He's very typical of the serious, enthusiastic Scandinavian who, when they come to Scotland, they are very methodical about sourcing their whiskey, trying whiskies, and then buying whiskies. Because across Scandinavia, Scotch whiskey has a very high status.
Yes.
Because of particularly the better bottlings now. You need the knowledge, you see. In the old days, you could trust the standard Lagavulin 16. Now you can't. So what they need to know is the Port Charlotte at £60 a bottle, maybe $110, $120 a bottle at 50%. Port Charlotte is arguably one of the finest heavily peated single malts coming from Islay at the moment. Better, more consistent than Lefroy.
Well, that's saying something. I want to try it now because
also look out for Kilchoman Snake. Not
That
all the Kilchomans are great, but that is a blended version of Kilchoman, and it's not too expensive.
Nice. Further question: is there a secret? Because there was, I forget their names right now. The two really annoying douchebags. Sorry, I'm using the wrong word.
Benny and Barry.
There we go. They talk about a secret code when they're referring to you because they don't like you. They don't like you at all when they see you coming into the bar, and that's okay with you, I'm sure.
They still can't stand me. They're real people.
Are they?
Oh yeah.
Well, I was going to ask, but I didn't want to put you on the spot and actually say names.
Fine.
But, okay, so they don't like you, and they talked about a secret code in this book, in Search for a Whisky Bothy, hidden somewhere in a distillery building somewhere. You're going to find a Port Ellen, and the clues were in this book.
Yeah.
Is there something like that?
No comment.
Okay, done. Well, and I said if there was one, I'm guessing it was at Cadenhead, but that's just
no comment.
No comment. Forget it. Next one. And this part was really fun because when I was reading it, I was thinking this has to do with something. I'm missing what this is. And I had to delve a little bit on the internet and do a little bit of search. So you quote, and this is the name, Tinseltown in the Rain by Blue Nile a couple of times. And one part is one of the workers at not the distillery, but what's his name? The younger, that's it. And he's gotten together with the new executive that's taking over the distillery. And they say, "Do I love you? Yes, I love you. Will we always be so happy go lucky?" And he didn't recognize the line, but she tells him this, and there's the engagement, so that was nice. And then, "Hey, there's a red car in the fountain." So both of these quotes, they seem to be out of nowhere, so I knew it had to do with something. So I got back to, and you said it right in the title. So Tinseltown in the Rain by Blue Nile. Am I missing any other quotes other than those two from that song?
Oh my goodness. Give me a second. I'll just have a quick reference here.
Okay.
Because they're right at the end of the chapter.
They are. Right. It's the last two pages.
Very end.
For those two, but I was wondering if there's others somewhere. I'll tell you the page if you need. It's going back to page 232.
So I said no me. So many steps in. Do I love you? Yes, I love you. Will we always be happy go lucky? There is a pause. Just give me the damn ring.
Yeah.
Muraka, she laughs, which is Sikh word for you daft fool, you know. So
because he didn't know the line.
He didn't know the line, despite the fact that he was very keen in music. But you see, the title is Tinseltown, and for a Ouija, which is a Glaswegian, when we're referring to Glasgow, we always call it Tinseltown.
Okay.
Because Tinseltown is cheap glamour.
Oh,
It's
okay.
cheap glamour.
Sure.
Tinsel is a strip of shredded plastic that
Which we threw on Christmas trees. Yep.
that you put on Christmas trees. And if people were having a party, they'd have a glitter ball and they'd have tinsel, right? For any event, celebrating a birthday or a wedding or anything like that. And so Glasgow is called Tinseltown. Tinseltown in the rain. I immediately, when I was choosing that title, because I wanted Glasgow to be in the bar. Glasgow is a very important presence, although it remains on the outside. The characters who come in are Glaswegians generally, are visitors to Glasgow. Such as
the bar up here as well, because I've got one up here.
Right, so, and of course, it's the front cover as the Bonaccord.
And I have, well, there, that and there, same thing, the Bonaccord. You also have a bottle from the Bonaccord.
I do, yeah. When I had a 10th anniversary, the Bonaccord went ahead and, with my full consent, they bottled a big oaky Kalila that they got from North Star Spirits, one of the leading independent bottlers.
Yes. Okay.
And that completely sold out very quickly because it's what happens. And the Tinseltown, the Blue Nile, when they're singing Tinseltown in the rain, it's very evocative of Glasgow. And there's the last line, and there's a red car in the fountain.
Yeah.
Now, I want to tell you about that.
I want to know what it means. I had no idea. I looked too.
In the 1980s, post the rock kind of scene, Glasgow had a few eccentric nightclubs pop up because there's a strong nightlife in Glasgow. It's got that sort of energy, and I've been part of that energy, whether it be going to the burlesque or the goth nights or whatever. You know, you get some really wonderful nights out. And in the centre of town, in a place called Cambridge Street, there was, for a while, there was a nightclub called the Alice Underground. And the idea was to replicate the absurdities of Alice in Wonderland in a basement nightclub. Nice. So they put red things in there. So they had a red telephone box, and there was a kind of ornamental pool for some reason. And they didn't want to put water in it. So they put a red car in it.
Okay.
And that's where the red car in the fountain, because the last thing you expect when you're going into an avant-garde nightclub in the centre of Glasgow is to walk round the corner towards the dance floor and see a red car just sitting in a fountain.
Yep, absolutely. Well, and it took me aback a little bit. I tried. I looked it up, but I'm glad you explained that to me. Thank you very much.
It is obscure. It's really only if you really knew Glasgow, you would know that. And if you had history with Glasgow, you'd know that.
Well, I'm only there for 3 days this summer. So 3 days Edinburgh, 3 days there, and then 3 days in Islay, 1 day in Cabbleton. I'm not sure if that's enough. And then maybe one of my Islay days becomes an errand day.
Yeah.
Okay. That's it.
Depends on the weather and depends if the ferries are sailing.
Yes, I've been told I have to be a little bit more up to moving my itinerary a little bit that way. Is there anything that I did not ask you, kind sir, that you would like to talk about within this book?
Well, no. I mean, we've had quite a session here over the book that, to be honest, when I write them, I let them go. You've got no choice. It's not like I come back in a year and I'll say, no, I'll edit this bit, I'll remove this bit, I'll add this bit.
Yeah.
When a book is written, you've got to leave it be. Let it have its own life. And certainly in my third book, Life, Death and Whiskey, I recognised that I have this parallel story of my career as a funeral director and how it ran in tandem with my interest in whiskey. And fueled my interest in whiskey and enhanced it, actually. And then, of course, there's my fourth book, which I begin writing next year.
Okay.
Which will be a travel book based on Barbados.
Oh,
so something very
into
different.
Rum.
Yes,
Okay.
it will be primarily a rum book, but from a whiskey perspective.
How so? Explain that to me, please.
Because I have spent most of my life in and around whiskey,
Right.
with rum being peripheral. Now, before I got into single malt whiskies, my drink of choice as a student and a young person starting my career was basically rum and tonic.
Okay.
Dark rum and tonic. Back in the 1980s, where the proprietary brands of high-strength rum, Lamb's, OVD, and Woods, were really good quality. They're nothing now. They're just what's available. But back then, they were really good quality stuff. And I could taste the rum through the tonic, because the tonic cut through the sweetness of the rum. Particularly molasses rum, the British Navy style of rum. That's really what I was kind of groomed on by my own choice.
Okay.
But then I moved into whiskey, but I never turned my back on rum, because as a whiskey drinker, you need an alternative. You need a change. You need something else that distracts you, not just flavor-wise, but culture-wise.
I agree. For me, it's beer. For you, it's rum. Okay.
And with rum, I mean, I've not been out with the UK for 8 years now, since I went to Bonneville. Any visits have been domestically to Scotland. So because I am working, assisting funeral directors, it's let me save up some money that I would like to, while the opportunity is still there, to actually go somewhere sunny in winter that's been on my bucket list for decades.
Good for you.
And I can do so saying, right, it's Ralfy here. I'd like to visit your rum distillery. I know whiskey distilleries. I know them inside out. I know what to expect. I want a change. I want different smells. I'm looking for a different liquor. I'm looking to taste the sugarcane crushed juice. It's such exciting times at the moment for rum, because they're rediscovering themselves and the actual variety and integrity of what they can produce. And the one island that stands out above all others in the Caribbean chain for me is Barbados.
Okay.
Because it has a sense of independence and opportunity, which you just don't see in Jamaica. And you see on a much smaller scale in the likes of Guadeloupe or St. Kitts.
Okay.
So in going to Barbados, there's 4 distilleries there. There will be more soon.
Okay.
But when you look particularly with what's coming out from Foursquare Distillery in their exceptional cask series, it's very exciting times to see rum producers produce something for the whiskey drinker. And at the same time, you see the independent bottlers in Scotland are buying barrels of rum. They're One Cask Nation. Excellent.
And that's the Foursquare there we're talking about. Yeah.
Really good stuff. That's exactly what I'm talking about. And see, when rum is matured slowly as the lambs.
Sorry, my wife got this out. She was thinking this is what you were referring to, like the one.
Yeah.
This is quite old, but it's hard to make your way through that proof.
Yeah.
But I'm guessing this would come through the tonic.
Yeah, absolutely comes right through the tonic. And of course, being high strength and at the price, it just lasts longer, which is great when you're a student on a budget.
Yes.
Which I was, a very tight budget. And I found that beer would just make me dizzy and sleepy. Whiskey I wasn't interested in at that point, but rum, it just basically kept me alert. And it was a cheap way to get where you wanted to be when you were a student that wanted to be a little bit pish, but not too drunk.
So you're going to relive your childhood and knock something off that bucket list, and because of your background now within this industry, get kind of a really good look within the inner workings of all the other distilleries. If there's 4 or 5 at that point in time, or 6 that you visit, that sounds like a fantastic time, and then a great book afterwards. I'm glad you're doing that.
It is a time when more whiskey drinkers who are getting and experiencing palate fatigue with whiskey, and this isn't unusual. There's people pouring a glass of heavily peated whiskey, and their senses are just saying, no, enough, I've had enough, no more.
Done.
And it's the same with people who are into sherried whiskies. There comes a point where the senses need a rest and ideally need a change. And rum is the perfect candidate for that, more so even than bourbon, because the production of bourbon is so concentrated with too few corporations who basically put out the same product in 100 labels.
Yes, but
yes.
I do like it. We're not going to poo-poo bourbon too much, because
no, not at all.
You enjoy it. I enjoy it. I do love it. But for me, I need the beer. I brew beer as well, but I like there are many different types. So it's something else for the mind as well. It's not just your palate. When you're so heavily involved in something. So for me, it's been whiskey for a very long time. I've needed something else to keep that love alive, because I don't think you can keep up that pace all the time with everything. You need something else. So good on you. Fantastic. So I'm looking forward to the 4th book. I'm going to try to get you on for the 3rd book 6 months from now or something else.
Okay.
We'll do that. And it seems like 2.5 hours or 2 hours and 40 minutes seems to be our sweet point, because that's what we were last time too.
Yeah.
Any other comments before we sign off there, Ralfy?
No, thanks very much for a sympathetic interview, Dolph. And we've covered a lot of ground, and it's been really nice, because it kind of reconnects me to what I've written previously. Good. And to kind of actually start to reread and just see how happy I am with the content of these books, because it genuinely is fresh content for what is a whiskey book. You won't find it in any other books. And as I said earlier, Dave Broom, he writes Dave Broom books. Charlie MacLean writes Charlie MacLean books.
And they're lovely. They're fantastic.
And they're lovely. They're excellent in their own context.
Yep.
But I can't do that. It would just be ridiculous. I've got to write with my own voice and my own narrative, and bring something different to people who are into whiskey and want to buy books. And that's what I do.
Well, and looking at the comments, because I read the comments when you do your extras, and when you read the comments on the side, people are really happy with the last week with the stories, and they're connecting with your stories. You didn't have a palate to be actually tasting and giving tasting notes at the time, but people were appreciative of what you did online, and they do like the stories. So that tells me that they should, if they haven't already, they should be buying that book to get more of the stories that you were already giving them, the history.
There you go.
All right, kind sir. There's
been a lot of requests for an audio book, but that's for a future date.
And you've already tried your hand. You were at the Bonnecourt 2 times. So if people want that, you can send them to there and see what the comments are afterwards. Because you read the first chapter in 2 parts. No, not the first, the last chapter in 2 parts. Sorry. It was fun.
Part of the 1,000 reviews celebration installation I had at the Bonnecourt.
Ah, good. All right.
So at the moment, I'm celebrating 50 million views on the channel.
Wow. That's impressive.
Thank you.
No, seriously. How many people can say that? No one I know. And there's a lot of people online and on radio. But to be able to count the views, I don't know how, I'm sure they do this on TV, how many people have actually watched for whatever large, huge, but has it ever gotten to the 50 million point? So I don't know. I think my wife likes the fact that you tell stories of the overlooked little people in the industry, and people have a voice. They're heartfelt. They can connect to be overlooked for whatever in their life at different times. So good job. Keep that up. People will keep watching no matter what. I think you can throw anything out there. I think they're going to still watch you for a while there, sir.
I am aware, Dolph, that I've had my kind of blue period over the last 2 years, where I have been rather cynical about some of what's being bottled by the industry.
That's okay.
I think they're kind of offloading the not so good cask stuff while the going's good, while the market's strong.
Yeah.
I really think there needs to be a comprehensive review right across the industry. In other words, for the bigger companies to follow suit with the smaller companies in making sure that the actual original cause of the reputation of Scotch whisky in the quality of smell and the quality of taste remains intact, and they don't try to dumb down the product to suit the passive consumer who is a fleeting customer and isn't particularly interested in the first place.
Perfect. And that's the final note that we're going to leave after 2 hours and 50 minutes. That's the perfect way to leave this off. Thank you very much, sir. And we're going to sign off. That's all the time we have. Whiskey brothers, sisters, and friends. It's been a fantastic morning, now an early afternoon for me and an evening for this kind person. Thanks to the listeners, everyone who joined us today. Not a whole bunch today, a lot more in the future. It's the way it always goes. Special thanks again to this gentleman right here, Ralfy Mitchell. Hopefully you'll be able to review a 4th book with me. I'm looking forward to it. As a final note, if you don't want to miss anything in the future, like, subscribe, do all that. But let's hold up a glass. Here's to good company.
Absolutely.
Here's to good whiskey. Here's to good conversation. And here's to seeing you again in the future, kind sir. Sláinte. Cheers.
Cheers now.